Chapter 281 _ Are you going to fight again? Li Ang. Magellan's tone was heavy, staring at Li Ang, his voice very hoarse. Anger followed in his heart, causing the venom on his body to fall to the ground. When Li Ang escaped from his hands, it brought him a lot of trouble. To ask for orders and lower his position to show his negligence. Although he didn't succeed, this has become his black spot, which made him reflect on himself all the time. Why did he have to be careless and let Li Ang go? But now, when he saw Li Ang again, the anger in his heart could not be contained. If you can catch the other party again, you can make up for his mistakes. How dare you come here? Magellan said in a low voice with a bit of coldness in his eyes. Why not? Li Ang smiled lightly and looked directly at Magellan in front of him without fear. At the beginning of his strength, he was a little cautious in the face of Magellan, for fear of being infected by the venom of the other party. But now, he doesn't need to be cautious. Magellan's strength can only be considered good in his opinion, but it can't make him serious. Director Magellan, please calm down. The flying squirrel's expression changed slightly, and he had to step forward and said quickly. If these two go to war, it will be troublesome. He would never think that Magellan could defeat Li Ang. The original Li Ang escaped from Magellan's hands, but now, Li Ang's strength is much stronger than before, and if he fought rashly, Magellan might really be killed by Li Ang. In order to avoid this, the flying squirrel had to contain Magellan's mood swings. As Li Ang said, he didn't take the initiative. It didn't mean that he would be bullied by others. As long as Magellan doesn't do it, Li Ang naturally won't do it. That's what the flying squirrel was thinking. He had to stop Magellan. I'm calm. Magellan glanced at the flying squirrel and said lightly. He calmed down a little, but looked at Li Ang's eyes, still very unfriendly, just like looking at a person who has a deep hatred. Li Ang didn't care about this at all. His expression was calm, and he said, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, lead the way. Where are you going? Magellan raised his brows, stopped Li Ang and others again, and asked. Infinite hell. The flying squirrel dripped cold sweat on his forehead, and he had expected the next scene. If Magellan disagreed, the two sides would still be deadlocked. Once the battle broke out, no one of his level would be able to participate in the battle. At that time, if there is such a terrifying battle here in the advancing city, I am afraid that the entire advancing city will be in a mess, and even if it will be penetrated, I am not sure. Infinite hell, can anyone come here? Magellan's face was calm, suppressing the anger in his heart, and said lightly, please come back. Here, I call the shots. Want to enter the infinite hell? No one can enter without my order. Originally, Li Ang really planned to leave, but after seeing Magellan's face, he didn't plan to leave. The corner of his mouth raised an arc, and he said with a smile, a mere defeat. You. Magellan was so angry that he burst out and shouted. Calm down. The flying squirrel's expression changed, and it was really difficult for him to be a human being caught in the middle. He had to restrain Magellan's mood swings, and at the same time looked at Li Ang, and said with some pleading, Lord Li Ang, please forgive me. It's okay, I said, I won't take the initiative, you can rest assured about that. Li Ang waved his hand and said very calmly. Hearing this, the flying squirrel looked at Magellan with a firm expression. Magellan's actions must be stopped. Once Magellan starts, there will be no turning point. Magellan's strength is far less terrifying than Li Ang. When he started, he was undoubtedly seeking his own death. At the same time. Chapter 281 _ Are you going to fight again? And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 35 and GT. At the same time. At this moment, a familiar voice came from Li Ang's head. The sound of the system appeared again. In the same picture, in the same place, the sound of the system appeared again, which made Li Ang feel a little emotional. Congratulations to the host, open the modifier, the toxicity antibody plus 999,999. Comprehend that 100 poisons do not invade. Open black lens bracket breakthrough novice close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough entry close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough proficiency close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket breakthrough master close black lens bracket. Hundreds of poisons do not invade. Li Ang was a little surprised, and immediately, looking at Magellan's eyes, there were some subtle changes. The ability of the poisonous fruit, in addition to bringing strong toxicity, has no more tyrannical tricks. Now, with the existence of the system, Li Ang also controls the ability to be invulnerable to all poisons. No matter how strong the poisonous fruit is, it cannot erode Li Ang's life. Now, things get interesting. Li Ang's eyes narrowed slightly. He really wanted to try it now, the ability to be invulnerable to all kinds of poisons. Stand still, let Magellan attack, and he won't die. With the ability to be invulnerable to all poisons, it is impossible for any poison to spread to his heart and kill him. I really want to see, when Magellan found out that his own fruiting ability was invalid, his expression at that time must be very wonderful. Li Ang thought so in his heart, and his smile became even brighter. Beside, Hancock looked at Li Ang suspiciously, not knowing why the other party's expression suddenly changed. 0. However, she chose to stand by quietly, without interrupting Li Ang's thoughts, nor forcibly intervening in the conversation between Li Ang and Magellan. Flying squirrel, it's not that I don't give you face, but it's business. How can a stranger enter the infinite hell? If he suddenly riots and releases the prisoners inside, who will be responsible? Magellan was expressionless, glanced at Li Ang, and said, "This." Flying squirrel stiffened, speechless. At this time, Li Ang replied directly with a smile, "If I want to release the prisoner, no one can stop me. Even you will be no exception." What a big breath. Magellan sneered and said gloomily, "If it wasn't for my carelessness, you wouldn't be able to escape. Now, it makes you so arrogant." In this moment and the other, the original me was the original me, and the current me is the current me. Li Ang waved his hand and said with a calm expression, "In front of me, when you are always the same." Magellan's eyelids jumped. Lang Lang said, "The atmosphere has become depressing." Silence. Flying squirrel felt a lot of pressure in his heart, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. These two really feel like a battle is about to break out. How to do? He alone could not prevent this from happening. The only way to break through is from Magellan, but the other party's temper is too stubborn, he can't do anything. I mean, are you going to fight again? Li Ang's eyes flickered with brilliance, and he looked at Magellan, and his voice came out. NLT, 36 and GT. Chapter 282 _ he is too strong. Don't be impulsive. Flying squirrel panicked. If the two really fight, then he is really finished. In this advancing city, two terrifying powerhouses are fighting. I am afraid that this advancing city will be beaten in 1,000 ways, right? In fact, he really looked up to Magellan. In less than 10 seconds, Li Ang was sure to kill Magellan in seconds, so how could it damage the environment here? Let me see you, how much your strength has increased, how dare you be so rampant? Magellan looked blankly at Li Ang and said. Seeing Li Ang's fearless appearance, the anger in his heart soared. This is the advanced city. This is his home court, how could he allow Li Ang to speak madly at him here? Come to fight. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, stretched out 3 fingers with a smile, and said lightly, 3 seconds, I will let you get up, 307. 10 seconds, I will let you die here. A time of madness. Magellan was angry and shouted loudly. Poisonous gas billowed from his body, overflowing the ground, and the deep purple venom was really making people dare not approach. The gas was also highly toxic and scattered around. Magellan, don't be impulsive. Flying Squirrel was full of anxiety and reprimanded, "It's not me who said that if you fight here, you can't take this responsibility. Moreover, you are really not his opponent. Even the three generals such as General Huang Yuan can't help each other." Quote, "Don't you think your strength is stronger than that of the three generals working together?" After finishing speaking, the Flying Squirrel also faced Li Ang's position and said sincerely, "Sir, please don't be impulsive. Don't worry, he won't do it, I won't do it." Li Ang waved his hand and smiled. "His position is very correct. If the other party doesn't make a move, he won't move. But if the other party does something, then it's no wonder he. Anyway, Magellan's venom is not lethal to him at all. He already has a 100% antibody to the poison, and no matter how terrifying the venom is, it can't bring him any damage. Therefore, Li Ang can stand in place and let Magellan attack with the strongest fruit ability, and it is impossible for him to be injured by the opponent." Humph! Magellan snorted coldly, forced by the Flying Squirrel to block in front of him, and restrained the venom a little. "See." Li Ang's eyes flashed with disappointment, and he shook his head and sighed. Originally, he thought that Magellan would do it. In this way, he can judge how tyrannical his body is to resist poison. This ability has just been acquired and must be used well. Unfortunately, Magellan was actually cowardly. At the critical moment, he did not continue to fight, which made Li Ang more or less disappointed. "It's finally resolved." Flying Squirrel exhaled heavily. Watching the atmosphere gradually become less serious, he was secretly relieved. As long as the two can stop, everything is fine. If a fight is really going to break out, the Flying Squirrel will not think that Magellan can leave here alive. When he was in the G3 branch at that time, Li Ang faced the siege of Lieutenant General Garp and Marshal of the Warring States period, and still severely injured General Kizaru. Such combat power is not something that ordinary people can stop. Magellan relied too much on the devil fruit. In this environment, he could indeed burst out with strength no less than that of a general, but that was all. And what about Li Ang? Li Ang's strength is far beyond the scope of a general. Chapter 282 He is too strong. And LT, 37 and GT. Li Ang's strength is far beyond the scope of a general. No matter how good the environment is, Magellan can't kill Li Ang, but will be directly obliterated by the opponent. It can be said that the Flying Squirrel's approach, in fact, also saved Magellan himself. "Magellan, I'll just take him to take a look. Anyone who is a little sensible knows that with his strength, if he really wants to break through the infinite hell, no one can stop him. You must be very clear about this. It's just that you don't want to admit it." Flying Squirrel looked at Magellan in front of him and said earnestly, "If he wants to take prisoners from here, he doesn't need to be so troublesome at all. With his strength, if he advances the city, I'm afraid he will be penetrated." Recalling that there were thousands of cracks in the sea at that time, the Flying Squirrel shuddered. Such terrifying power is definitely not something he or Magellan can stop. Perhaps, only Lieutenant General Garp, Marshal of the Warring States period, and other people with the highest level of strength can stop one or two. To be a general, it would be very difficult to block that slash. After all, this was the power of Li Ang's strongest blow. It traversed a distance of 3,000 meters on the sea, and finally destroyed a deserted island. It is conceivable that such combat power is terrifying and outrageous. He's too strong. The Flying Squirrel gritted his teeth. Even though he didn't want to admit it, Li Ang's strength was indeed too strong. Especially after this voyage at sea, watching the picture of the sea being cut off, it really made him unable to easily forget it in his life. "I'll handle it." Magellan pushed the Flying Squirrel away, stared at Li Ang, and said bluntly, "You block me, and I will send you to the infinite hell." "How?" "A trick." Li Ang was a little surprised and smiled. "Don't you dare. Then go back the same way." Magellan's face was calm, unmoved, and did not give in at all. The Flying Squirrel was about to speak, and Li Ang took the lead in saying, no problem, I still have some expectations for one move. He didn't want to enter the infinite hell, but he just wanted to have a simple common sense, what it was like to be invulnerable to all poisons. Therefore, after Magellan proposed this condition, he readily accepted it. Lord Liang. The flying squirrel had a dry throat and said in a low voice. He really couldn't understand why Liang agreed. Magellan's venom, let alone him, even if it is a general, even Lieutenant General Garp, Marshal of warring states and other extremely tyrannical people standing here, they would not dare to say head-on resistance. The venom of the poisonous fruit is too poisonous. If the general is contaminated, he will fall into a state of coma on the spot. If there is no antidote, it will be difficult to save life. And Liang in front of him actually challenged the toxicity of venom. This is unacceptable in 1.6. What exactly is in the head of a powerful person? Sir, are you all right? Hancock's beautiful eyes asked with a little worry. Are you still worried? Liang rubbed Hancock's hair and said with a smile, let's step back. It just so happens that I will also learn from the experience that the strongest poison in the world can actually hurt my body. Yeah. Hancock took out his long, slender, jade-like legs, took a few steps back, and nodded. At this time, even Magellan was a little stunned. He stared at Liang blankly, the corners of his mouth moved slightly, and he whispered to himself, actually, did you really agree? He didn't expect that Liang actually accepted his conditions. Originally, he just wanted to embarrass Liang. But I didn't expect that, actually, I really agreed. Chapter 283 hundreds of poisons do not invade. Are you sure? My poison can kill anyone. Magellan's eyes flickered, staring at Liang, and said lightly. He couldn't hold back his mood anymore, and all his anger finally had an outlet to vent. The opponent actually dared to resist head-on, which really made him a little excited. Before, Liang was unable to keep up with his speed, and in the end, he was stunned by Tilda. Now, if there is a head-on collision, he is still very confident in his fruit ability. Venom can completely cover all areas. No matter how strong Liang was, in his opinion, it was nothing more than that. Really, can you kill Kaido too? The corner of Liang's mouth twitched, and he couldn't help laughing. Kaido, who was arrested many times by the Navy headquarters, did not die in the end. The Navy headquarters tried countless methods, but they were unable to kill Kaido. Naturally, Magellan's venom could not kill Kaido. Hearing this, Magellan's face gradually became ugly, and he really spoke to his heart. He really tried to use his venom to see if he could kill Kaido. The final result disappointed him. Instead of dying, Kaido was alive and well. This is really a bit of a blow to his self-confidence. Sure enough, you're still a loser. Liang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Suddenly, he saw everything Magellan was thinking. Humph. Magellan became angry, snorted coldly, stared at Liang, and said, are you ready? Block my blow and you can leave. Don't be so troublesome, I'm standing here. If your venom can kill me, then I can only blame me for being unlucky. But I don't think your venom will have any effect on me. As soon as Liang's words came out, Magellan was shocked. That means, to bear the venom of his poisonous fruit head-on. This is just crazy. Except for Kaido, he has never seen anyone who dares to meet his venom head-on. Even the generals, or the other 4 emperors, would not dare to exaggerate. And Liang actually said these words reluctantly. Magellan was excited and shouted, this is what you said yourself, and you regret who your grandson is. In order to prevent Liang from repenting, he hurriedly filled his words. Ah! The flying squirrel was completely stunned. He stared at Liang blankly, his lips moved slightly, and for a while, he was unable to speak. He really didn't know what to say, facing the venom head-on. Is this move too crazy? Is it? Can Liang really survive? He would never joke about his life. For example, the ship of pirates that was let go at that time, he had absolute confidence in his own strength, only let the other party walk for 2 minutes, and then gradually started. The situation today is exactly the same. His confidence is definitely not in vain. If this is the case, then, as early as the G3 branch war, he has been killed. Is he really sure? If that's the case, it's too scary. Invulnerable to all poisons. Flying Squirrel kept thinking in his heart, but couldn't get an answer. He could only fix his eyes on Liang and wait for the result. I have to admit that now he is a little nervous and curious. And Hancock turned pale and said anxiously, "Sir. Don't worry." Liang gave Hancock a reassuring look and smiled. After seeing his confident face, Hancock breathed a sigh of relief. Although there was still a bit of worry on his delicate face, she still believed in Liang's strength. Since the other party dares to say these words, it must be relied upon. Chapter 283 hundreds of poisons are invincible. And LT, 39 and GT. Since the other party dares to say these words, it must be relied upon. If the Lord is injured, I want him to die. Hancock's beautiful eyes flashed a cold and stern light, looking at Magellan, and his heart was murderous. At this moment, facing Liang's confident face, Magellan was also confident in his venom, raised his head, and said with a smile, "If you die, don't blame me." "I don't blame you, I'm afraid, your venom is not even worthy of tickling me." Liang said calmly and laughed. "I don't know what it is." Magellan snorted coldly, his face gradually gloomy. He looked at the Flying Squirrel beside him and said, "Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, please exit this area. Lest my venom hurt your body. This is a bit embarrassing." "Good." Flying Squirrel retreated a little more than a dozen meters away, stared at the scene in front of him, and focused his attention. This is a passage opening, and the surrounding area is not very wide. It is about 30 meters wide, showing an oval shape and about 15 meters high. Maybe it's too big for ordinary people. However, for Liang or Magellan, the fighting area here is very small. For Magellan, this environment is simply his most ideal fighting environment. In particular, Liang said that he would never resist, he would bear it with his body, and directly radiated the excitement in his heart, and wanted to urgently see the picture of Liang being killed by his venom. If I kill him, then I can make up for it. Magellan thought, his face became very determined. On his body, a piece of purple venom emerged, filling the surroundings. The great soldier of poison, judgment of hell. From the beginning, Magellan broke out the strongest blow. The poison of the skeleton-shaped giant released from the body is different from the purple poison that is generally released. This trick is a special bright red poison. This trick, any substance that comes into contact with it will be infected and will gradually spread and erode everything. As long as a person comes into contact with the poison, it will gradually spread until death. Magellan's face gradually changed, and he laughed, full of confidence. As long as it touches a little bit, it can continuously erode the enemy's body, and the poison will continue to spread, which is his strongest move. Far away, the Flying Squirrel felt a terrifying poison and drifted away from the air. What a strong poison! The Flying Skier took a deep breath, his expression full of horror, said. If this move hits him head-on, I'm afraid that he won't even have any bones left. Thinking of this, he looked at Liang's back and frowned. So, Liang, can you stop it? If it can't be stopped, the world government will be missing a terrifying enemy. He was not disgusted by this. Whether Liang is alive or dead, his mood will not change much. Of course, as a navy, the picture he most likes to see is of course Liang being infected by this poison and then completely dead. However, Flying Squirrel would never think that Liang would do this kind of unprepared death situation. Since it is promised, there must be something to rely on. Except. Magellan grinned, his expression gradually became crazy, and shouted, "Die!" The bright red venom was like seawater, falling from the sky and covering Li Yang's position. From the beginning to the end, Li Yang's expression did not waver, even with a slight smile, and did not put the bright red venom in his eyes at all. At the same time, he did not use armed color, nor did he have any blocking behaviors and actions. Judging from his appearance, it seemed that he really wanted to block this move with his own body. It's crazy. Flying Squirrel sucked in a breath of cold air and shuddered, saying. Chapter 284 No longer a level person. Don't let anything happen. Hancock also backed away. Maimu raised her little heart with deep worry, and her eyes were fixed on Li Yang's body, without blinking, not daring to be careless. What if something really happened? Then she would regret it. Therefore, she is brewing an attack, and if there is an accident, she will kill Magellan as soon as possible. At this moment, Magellan looked at Li Yang, who was motionless and didn't even do anything to resist, and laughed. This world is too crazy to have a character like you. However, today, you deserve to die. Don't you realize that you're talking too much nonsense? Li Yang's face was calm, looking at the bright red venom rushing towards his face, said lightly. Die. Magellan's face gradually became gloomy, and he controlled the venom and slammed it down from the sky. Tick-tock. The bright red venom fell to the ground, emitting white smoke, and the poisonous gas spread. The poisonous gas in the air of 127 inches made people couldn't help but cover their noses and dare not breathe. Just in his sight, bright red venom suddenly enveloped Li Yang. Boom! In the sky, a large cloud of bright red venom, like seawater, quickly covered the area below, and even Magellan himself was shrouded in it. However, as a poisonous person with poisonous fruits, it is naturally impossible for him to be killed by his own poison. He himself is in the venom, like a duck in water, without any pressure. Whoever is blinded by faith, it is not a pity to die. Magellan dripped bright red venom on his body, and said expressionlessly. He stared at the front. The bright red venom had enveloped Li Yang, and he couldn't even see the other party's figure. It was as if the entire body was infected with venom, as if it was deeply immersed in the sea, and every corner of the body was hit by the venom. In Magellan's view, Li Yang had no chance of surviving. Unless... Once again Kaido is such a terrifying monster. But Li Yang is obviously not a giant, but an ordinary human race. It stands to reason that it is impossible to be defeated by Kaido's strong vitality and defense. Is it dead? Flying Squirrel looked restrained on the side, his throat was dry, and he whispered to himself. The other side. Hancock's beautiful eyes showed murderous intent, staring at Magellan, brewing an attack, and the strongest blow will erupt at any time, killing Magellan. However, now that Li Yang is still alive and dead, she is forcing herself not to act rashly. At this time, Li Yang himself was in the bright red venom, and he felt a hot breath all over his body, burning on his skin. Venom, with powerful corrosiveness. And what Li Yang possesses is that it is immune to all poisons. Therefore, his skin will still have that burning sensation, but for him, it is not very strong. Nice venom. Li Yang narrowed his eyes slightly, and said with a smile. For him, it was as comfortable as soaking in a hot spring in a hot spring. The surrounding is very warm, and the violent poison cannot penetrate his body, but can only bring him that soft touch. I don't know. Magellan knows his venom and can only give me a bath. What will he look like? The corners of Li Yang's mouth twitched slightly, thinking so in his heart. He was looking forward to seeing Magellan's self-confidence expression, which was severely beaten. Immediately, he slowly spread out his hands, and from the bright red venom, an unscarred arm protruded. In the external environment, Magellan was laughing confidently. Suddenly, he saw an arm sticking out of the venom, and his pupils shrank, a little unbelievable. Death struggle. Magellan's mouth moved slightly, and he whispered. Chapter 284 No longer a level person. Magellan's mouth moved slightly, and he whispered. However, just as his words fell, From the venom, the second arm was protruded again. The two arms showed a bronze color and a healthy complexion. On the arms, let alone corroded, not even a trace of scars could be seen. What's the matter? The flying squirrel was also startled, his lips trembling. Even far away, he could feel the severe toxicity of the bright red venom. However, even this kind of venom can't cause damage to Liang. This is too scary. My goodness. The flying squirrel stared blankly at the two arms protruding from the venom, unable to speak for a long time. Looking at it this way, Liang's level of terror is really outrageous. If such a violent poison can't bring harm to the opponent, then the opponent's defense and vitality can be imagined. What he could never have imagined was that Liang was invulnerable to all kinds of poisons. Boom! A loud bang. The bright red venom was directly shaken away, contaminating the surrounding walls. With a strong toxicity, even the walls were corroded and holes appeared. The flying squirrel held a saber and used the domineering armament to block the splashing venom. Hancock unfolded his knowledge very calmly, dodging these messy venoms easily. His red lips were slightly raised, and he showed a reassuring smile. Since there is still movement inside, it means that Liang has nothing to do. Lord Liang, he is really strong. Hancock said with a thick smile. Compared with the expressions of Flying Squirrel and Hancock, Magellan was very shocked. He took a half step back, his whole face was full of disbelief, and he shouted, "Impossible. How is this possible? He is trapped in my venom, there is no way he is still alive. He must be struggling, and within a minute, he will be completely dead." Magellan's lips trembled, and he couldn't accept the picture he saw. He is quite confident about the toxicity of his venom. Apart from Kaido, he does not think that there is any existence in this world that can resist his poison. However, at this time, he actually saw a freak like Liang. Right in his sight. In the bright red venom, a head stuck out. It was Liang's face, looking at Magellan with a smile, and there was no sign of being infected by the venom. "Does your poison seem to be ineffective against me?" Liang pushed aside the bright red venom around him and smiled faintly. You. Magellan swallowed, his mind completely broken. The venom he was most proud of, unexpectedly, couldn't even do the slightest damage to Liang. "Is this the venom of your confidence?" Liang picked up a ball of bright red venom, and put 5.4 directly to his mouth. Under the horrified eyes of the crowd, he opened his mouth directly, swallowed the bright red venom into his belly, and chewed it with a smile. "The taste is not bad, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, you can try it." "Ah." Flying Squirrel froze, accompanied by a smile. "Sir, forget it, I'll forget it." Even swallowed the venom. Magellan was so shocked at the moment, seeing Liang swallowing his strongest venom into his stomach, it was really infiltrating. It seems that the difference in level between the two is too big. Magellan's strongest blow, the most terrifying poisonous fruit erupted, the strongest move, and also the most poisonous. But, in Liang's eyes, feelings are just food. Not only did it not bring any injuries to the surface, but even swallowed it into the stomach, it was still like a normal person, and there was no sign of being infected by the poison. And LT, 42 and GT. Chapter 285 _ Your confidence is like a toy. How is it? Liang stared at Magellan in front of him, and there was still some bright red venom left on his body, but to him, it was not lethal. The system's invulnerability to all poisons is truly terrifying. Knew it. Produced by the system, it must be a fine product. Liang was in a surging mood, and the smile on his face became even brighter. If there is no invincible poison given by the system, I am afraid that he will not dare to meet Magellan's venom head-on. But now he, no matter any poison, will become his excrement when he eats it in his stomach, and no poison will cause him any harm. The so-called invincible poison is exactly that. This ability is also Magellan's greatest natural enemy. Magellan's proud venom was restrained by Liang's invincibility. Even if Liang has no other abilities, as long as he maintains the ability to be invulnerable to all poisons, he can be invincible in front of Magellan. What kind of monster are you? Magellan's self-confidence collapsed and he blurted out uncontrollably. He couldn't accept it. Not only was his venom incapable of harming anyone, but it was swallowed directly into his stomach as if it were food. 28 Could it be that his venom is so unbearable? As the saying goes, be willing to admit defeat. This time, you lost. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said lightly. In his eyes, Magellan was nothing. At the beginning, when he had to face Magellan, he still had to be cautious. But now, in the face of Magellan's words, he seems to be at ease. Even if it is careless. Anyway, Magellan's venom could not bring him the slightest injury. Even standing still, Magellan couldn't hurt him. Being immune to all poisons gave Li Ang the confidence to stand in front of Magellan and not be moved at all. I lost. Magellan stared blankly at his hands. The ability of poisonous fruit was the source of his self-confidence. But when facing Li Ang, he was beaten to the core. His self-confidence, in front of Li Ang, is vulnerable. Even the strongest move was defeated by Li Ang without causing any hindrance to the opponent. He even ate the venom directly in front of him. This kind of picture really shattered all the confidence in his heart. It is simply a great humiliation. Magellan. The corner of the flying squirrel's mouth moved slightly, trying to persuade the other party. Li Ang can't be seen as an ordinary person. If he can see Li Ang from a normal person's point of view, it is impossible for the other party to do things that shock the sea. Therefore, it is normal for Magellan to lose. There is no need to belittle yourself for this. But, Magellan obviously, in this case, no words of comfort can be heard. He was silent in his defeat, unable to extricate himself. Let's go. Li Ang glanced at the flying squirrel's position and said lightly. He didn't pay attention to Magellan's movements. This time, the opponent was completely defeated by him. Moreover, from the most confident point of view on the road, defeat him. Therefore, it is conceivable that Magellan's mentality will also face signs of collapse. When a person defeats himself from the perspective of his most self-confidence, in this way, this person will naturally doubt his own ability. Once this emotion arises, it is terrifying, and this emotion will continue to spread, torturing the person to the point of collapse. Magellan, this emotion arises in my heart. Li Ang resisted his venom from a positive perspective, and swallowed the venom into his stomach in front of his face. These actions were more uncomfortable than defeating the opponent. Chapter 285 Your confidence is like a toy. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 43 and GT. Li Ang resisted his venom from a positive perspective, and swallowed the venom into his stomach in front of his face. These actions were more uncomfortable than defeating the opponent. The blow is far more ruthless than defeating Magellan head-on. Hancock. Li Ang's eyes softened slightly, looking at Hancock's pretty face and smiling. Hancock gradually walked to Li Ang's side and whispered angrily, "In the future, you can't do such a dangerous thing. You don't know how worried I was just now." "Okay, I see, my wife." A smile appeared on Li Ang's face and said, "Bah." Hancock blushed and lowered his head shyly. "Let's go." Li Ang took Hancock's boneless slender hand, feeling the cold and soft touch, and said, "Yeah." Hancock nodded lightly and followed Li Ang's side. Li Ang and Hancock jumped over Magellan's side, without ignoring each other's intentions, and went straight through. "How exactly did you do it?" Magellan turned sharply, looked at Li Ang's back, and roared. His face was flushed, and his mood swings were violent. After all, the most self-confident thing in oneself is clearly destroyed, and this state will happen to anyone. "My venom is the most poisonous in the world." Magellan, still in disbelief, shouted loudly. In the past, it was hard to see such a gaffe. But now, when his self-confidence was defeated, his original calmness was gone forever. Now he is just a defeated dog. Magellan. Flying Squirrel looked at Magellan's state, sighed silently, and couldn't help shaking his head. He knew very well that Magellan had really been beaten completely. Can't you believe it? Li Ang turned his head, looked at Magellan, and said bluntly, actually, I didn't want to say that, but it's the truth. Your self-confidence, in front of me, is like a 713 toy. As for what you call the world's strongest poison, also depends on who the opponent is. Quote. In other people's eyes, your toxicity may be very terrifying. But in my eyes, your poison, I can be like drinking water. No matter how much, no matter how strong it is, it can't help me. Because. Li Ang laughed. I am invulnerable to all poisons. Hundreds of poisons do not invade. It was the first time Magellan had heard this word, and he muttered absent-mindedly. Does it mean that no poison can invade the body? How did you do it? How did the other party achieve this step? Okay, not much to say, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, lead the way. Li Ang looked at the stunned Flying Squirrel and said directly. Yes, my lord. Flying Squirrel came back to his senses and glanced at Magellan with a little deep empathy. He sighed inwardly and said nothing more. In this case, only Magellan realized it himself. If you can get out of this situation, it is naturally good. But if he can't come out, he will live in the shadow of Li Ang all his life. Soon. Under the leadership of the Flying Squirrel, Li Ang took Hancock's little hand and walked out of the passage on the other side. Here, Magellan was left alone, his face was dull and motionless, and he didn't know what he was thinking. NLT, 44 and GT. Chapter 286-Infinite Hell. Lord Li Ang, this time, you can be regarded as defeating his self-confidence. In a short time, I am afraid that he will live in your shadow and be unable to extricate himself. The Flying Squirrel smiled bitterly and said to Li Ang. After all, the advanced city also belongs to the Navy headquarters. And Magellan, even more so his colleague, how could he be happy when he saw the picture of his colleague being defeated head-on? I didn't do anything, it's just that he was too confident. You didn't see me, I'm already very kind. Otherwise, I would have defeated him completely. Li Ang smiled lightly and said bluntly. Hearing this, Flying Squirrel was speechless, but it was also true. With Li Ang's strength, he can completely kill Magellan. But the other party did not, obviously, want to defeat the other party from Magellan's most confident place. This makes Magellan's mentality definitely facing signs of collapse. Thinking of this, the Flying Squirrel shuddered and his scalp tingled. At first, he thought that even if Li Ang didn't die, he would definitely be seriously injured. But he never imagined that Li Ang walked out of the venom unscathed, and there was no sign of being infected by the venom on his entire body. It's too strong. Flying Squirrel thought to himself, and couldn't help feeling very emotional. If Li Ang could be a member of the Navy, it would be a nightmare for those pirates. It's a pity that Li Ang is not a Navy, but also, he is not a pirate. This also allows them, as people in the Navy, to breathe a sigh of relief. If there is a person like Li Ang as an enemy, their Navy will be very troubled. It is not a solution to send someone out to arrest the other party. Unless, the Navy headquarters came out in full force, and it was not necessarily 100% sure that Li Ang could be sent to the advanced city. Even if it is sent to the advanced city, it is inevitable that Li Ang will escape again. It can be said that in this world, nothing is absolutely certain to deal with Li Ang. It is for this reason that the Flying Squirrel chose to directly let Li Ang enter the infinite hell. Anyway, they can't beat them. If the other party wants to save people from the advanced city, it will be very easy. It's better to cooperate, and it will save the relationship between the two sides. It can be seen that the Flying Squirrel is still quite flexible with its head. A long time. Under the leadership of the Flying Squirrel, they quickly passed through the 5th floor. In fact, there are 5.5 floors, as the Shemale Kingdom of the advancing city. But the route that the Flying Squirrel takes is a very branch line leading to infinite hell, so it directly leaves the 5.5th floor position, and it is even more impossible to meet people in the human and monster kingdom. Sir, in front of you is the infinite hell. The flying squirrel looked at the position ahead, took a deep breath, and said. Coming here, the atmosphere became very solemn and depressing. After all, everyone detained here is a terrifying pirate who is famous in the sea. In the front passage, there are many naval guards and independent cells, where each pirate is placed independently in the cell. Avoid conflicts or conspiracies. Every pirate is assigned to a separate cell. The prisoners are all powerful monsters. Flying Squirrel's expression became serious, and he said slowly. Even he didn't dare to say that he could fight against the prisoners in the cell. Come on, I haven't been here before. Li Ang smiled, his expression did not change, said. These prisoners may be quite extraordinary for flying squirrels. Chapter 286-Infinite Hell. NLT, 45 and GT. These prisoners may be quite extraordinary for flying squirrels. But for Li Ang, that sentence is nothing to be afraid of. Even if there is one of the 4 emperors imprisoned here, he will not feel nervous. That's because those under your command were negligent. Otherwise, with your strength, Lord Li Ang, when you sent it in, you should have been sent to infinite hell. It's a pity that you didn't reveal your strength at that time. The flying squirrel said with a hint of bitterness on the corner of his mouth. If it's infinite hell, do you think I can escape? Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, and said with interest on his face. Hard to say. Flying Squirrel was tangled, hesitated for a moment, and replied. He is still very confident in his defense against infinite hell. Even if a person with Li Ang's strength is imprisoned here, it is still unknown whether he can escape. It seems that this place has given you a lot of confidence. Li Ang saw the flying squirrel's confidence in this place and didn't care, he smiled. Not to mention that with his strength, no one in this world can catch him, let alone imprison him here. Even if he was caught and imprisoned in the cell of infinite hell, and was chained by Helushi's iron chain, he still had 100% confidence to escape from here. The ability of the system is more than a simple answer. If you have a chance, you can give it a challenge. Give it a try, be imprisoned in infinite hell, and then find a way to escape. Isn't this very exciting? Li Ang's eyes twinkled brightly, thinking to himself. Is this the pirate version of Jin Chan's escape? However, this is far more terrifying than Jin Chan's escape. Bombs can't blow up this place, and besides being locked in a cage, there is no chance to get out of the cage. Unless, it's time for execution. No time is his own, all must be spent in the cage, in that dim environment. Therefore, no matter how many strategies there is no way to do it. Every day in the dark cage, the words of ordinary people have long been aroused by mental illness. 3 days a day, there are also people who send it over. Handcuffs, anklets, etc., all measures will not loosen. So what is certain is that if the people who escaped from the shell of Jin Chan are put here, they will die, and even if they have the wisdom of the sky, there is no way to escape from here. Diaresis, sir, we have entered an infinite hell. Flying Squirrel took Li Ang and Hancock out of the submarine elevator and said, here, few people know about it. Basically, few people know that there is a 6th floor in Advanced City. This is the infinite hell. Li Ang moved out of the elevator with Hancock. Zhao Zhaohao looking at the empty and silent corridor ahead, a strong interest appeared on his face. Silent. There was no sound other than silence. The atmosphere has become very depressing. Even if they were imprisoned in the cell, the prisoners inside still exuded a terrifying aura, which made people feel uneasy. Even the flying squirrel, the lieutenant general of the headquarters, standing here, felt the terrifying momentum that rushed towards his face, which made him feel heavy. On the contrary, Li Ang seemed to be calm and unhurried, and he was not affected by these auras at all. Sure enough, it is Li Ang. Looking at Li Ang's relaxed expression, Flying Squirrel sighed in his heart and said, Li Ang walking here is like walking in the back garden of his own house. Not only is he very relaxed, but he also seems to have a somewhat leisurely and elegant feeling. This made the flying squirrel have a strong self-doubt, and compared with Li Ang, he was very unsightly. Chapter 287 _ This man is not easy. In an empty and quiet hallway. Only Li Ang and Hancock, plus a lieutenant general of the headquarters, the flying squirrel, were walking around. The sound of footsteps lingered around. There was no sound in the darkened cell. Tread. Tread. Li Ang's face was calm, and he walked around the passageway. Except for the sound of footsteps, there was no other sound. The atmosphere seemed very depressing. The prisoners here are very different from ordinary prisoners. They didn't shout loudly for someone to let them out, because they knew the Navy couldn't let them out anyway. Since they were held here, it has been impossible for the Navy to release them. Even if he broke his throat, it was only in vain. It's better to save some effort, that's the best move. The time here is still very long. They are also very tired when they shout like this every day. Not only are they tired physically, but also their hearts are tired, and they gradually become rotten. Sir, please come with me. The flying skier took a deep breath and adjusted his emotions, said. Good. Li Ang nodded, took Hancock's little hand, and followed behind calmly. On both sides of the passing position, in the cell, prisoners are held one by one. 937. Some of them have dull eyes, some have vicissitudes of life, and occasionally some people will look at Li Ang, but there is not much turbulence and movement. They've been here for far too long. So much so that they haven't even heard of Li Ang's name. Not to mention, seeing Li Ang's portrait. Bang! A prisoner grabbed the iron gate of the sea tower with both hands, and his fierce eyes were fixed on Li Ang, who passed by, motionless. Little devil, you are very good looking. This is a middle-aged strong man with several scars on his face, looking very ferocious and terrifying. A fierce aura, people dare not approach. My lord, don't pay attention to him, he is the most active prisoner here. On weekdays, when he sees a person, he has to talk to the other person. Perhaps, this is his move to prove that he is still alive. Glancing at the prisoner, the flying squirrel explained. So it is. Li Ang suddenly glanced at the prisoner meaningfully, and in the other's eyes, he saw desire. Longing for freedom, longing for survival, longing for. The heavy emotions were mixed together in his eyes. It is conceivable how much he wanted to escape from this ghost place. But unfortunately, Li Ang was unmoved, and it was impossible to take action for this indifferent person. Boy, come and say a few words with me. It's been a long time since I've spoken to anyone. You talk to me, and I'll tell you a big secret. The middle-aged strong man looked at Li Ang with a bit of anticipation, and his voice was loud and clear. I'm not interested in your secrets. Li Ang's face was calm, without any expression fluctuations, said. Not necessarily. The middle-aged strong man laughed and said meaningfully, this secret is related to the final island of Ralph Drew. I believe that no one in this world can stand the temptation of it. Then have you been there? The corner of Li Ang's mouth twitched and asked with a smile. Ah. Middle-aged strong man was stunned, shook his head and said, no. That's it. You haven't been there, so what nonsense are you talking about? Li Ang shook his head and laughed, and ignored the middle-aged strong man. Chapter 287 _ This man is not easy. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 47 and GT. Li Ang shook his head and laughed, and ignored the middle-aged strong man. Seeing Li Ang gradually leave, the middle-aged strong man reacted and shouted quickly, you will definitely regret it, this secret will make you stronger. So what? Li Ang doesn't care anymore. With the system in my hands, he doesn't worry about the chance to become stronger at all. Moreover, now he is already very strong. Suddenly, in order to block the mouth of the middle-aged strong man, Li Ang exuded a vigorous aura. Buzz. A terrifying aura enveloped the middle-aged strong man. In an instant, his face turned pale, his lips trembled, and he stared at Li Ang's back, his expression full of fear. He. The middle-aged strong man looked terrified, and for a while, he couldn't even utter a complete sentence. Cha. This breath came and went quickly, causing him to shed cold sweat on his forehead. His spine was wet with cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with uncontrollable fear. This man is strong. Powerful enough to make him despair. Even more powerful than the generals he once faced. Who is he? A question, deeply enveloped in his heart. Who is this young man who appeared in the sixth layer of infinite hell? Is there still such a number one person in the Navy headquarters? To have such a terrifying strength is really a bit chilling. Recalling the feeling of being enveloped by that momentum just now, the middle-aged strong man felt his scalp numb, and he couldn't help shaking, shivering. Opposite him, in the cell, an old man opened his eyes, looked at the middle-aged strong man strangely, and asked lightly, "Stella, what's the matter with you guy?" "No, nothing. It just feels, it's horrible." The middle-aged strong Han Stella's lips trembled, unable to contain the fear, said. "Oh." The old man became interested, looked at Li Ang's back, then at Stella, and asked, "Are you afraid, this young man? You are really useless. A mere young man will scare you. Like this. The fierce Stella back then is gone forever. You don't have the blood you used to have, and now you are just a poor bastard." Facing the old man's words, Stella shook her head and said solemnly, "You don't understand." "I don't understand." Old man laughed dumbly, as if he didn't want to be looked down upon, and said, "Back then, I was." "That taste." Stella stopped the old man's words, and said in a heavy tone, "I have never felt it on anyone. This is the first time I have felt such a terrible aura from a person. I am sure that this person's strength is definitely stronger than that of the general. Even 10 of me can't shake him. Old man, don't talk about me, even if it is 100 of you, it may not be his opponent." "Just kidding." The old man sneered, but his face gradually became solemn. He knew Stella and had played against each other before, so he naturally knew the opponent's strength. The person who can make the other party so jealous, I'm afraid, it's not easy. Think of this. The old man moved his eyes and looked at Li Ang's back in the distance, his expression became very heavy. "The Navy headquarters, how did you find this kind of monster? This man is not the Navy." The old man raised his brows and came to a conclusion after looking at the clothes Li Ang was wearing. If it was the Navy, even the Warring States period was no exception. Before coming here, you must have put on a Navy uniform. But this man didn't. Therefore, he is sure that this person will never be the Navy. Since it is not a Navy, but it can come here, which is a bit intriguing. This man is not easy. NLT, 48 and GT. Chapter 288-Meet Ace. Front. The flying squirrel was wondering why that guy didn't make any noise. It stands to reason, that guy can't stop so easily. That's right. He turned his head, looked suspiciously at the cell behind him, and whispered to himself, could it be that he has changed his temper? Has his personality changed over the years? But these, he can only guess in his heart. As for the real answer, he couldn't reveal it at all. Then, Countless walked ahead. In the position behind him, Li Ang took Hancock's soft little hand and passed the surrounding cells. Countless big pirates were in the cell, watching Li Ang leave. Their faces were expressionless, they didn't bring any sound, and they remained silent. In their view, even begging for mercy is just a useless move. Moreover, even if they are imprisoned here, it does not mean that they will surrender to the Navy. Their restless hearts have never left their bodies. Bow to the Navy. This is absolutely impossible for them to do. Silence. There was no sound from the cells on both sides. Li Ang is also leisurely, his face is calm, like shopping, watching the big pirates move away from his sight, without any expression. Fierce, bewildered, domineering, etc. Every pirate has a different aura, but none of them can change Li Ang's mood swings. Lord Li Ang, ahead, it's almost there. The corner of the flying squirrel's mouth moved slightly, and he opened his mouth slowly, reminding, however, you can only look inside through the door, and you can't open the door to chat with him in front of him. I hope you can understand. I see. Li Ang nodded and said lightly. He originally just wanted to come here, just to send a message by the way, and it wasn't something he had to do. Now that they have come, they naturally have to complete what they planned before. After another 3 minutes. Under the leadership of the flying squirrel, Li Ang successfully arrived at the gate of Ace's prison. The flying squirrel stood aside, waiting quietly. Under his orders, the guards on both sides stood by themselves, without disturbing Li Ang. Their faces were expressionless, and they stood motionless. Li Ang stood in front of the stone iron gate of Halu, his eyes narrowed slightly, looking at a young man in the dark environment inside. His face was calm. Bang! A crisp sound. From the darkness of the cell, a man walked out. His face was expressionless, his expression was full of deathly breath, his eyes were blank, and he looked at Li Ang's position. Ace. Li Ang recognized the identity of this young man at a glance, said. This person is Luffy's brother, the captain of the 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates, Fire Fist Ace. At the same time, he is also the only son of Roger One Piece. He has black hair, a normal complexion, and freckles on his cheeks. Left arm has a tattoo of the word, ASCE, in which S is crossed. Who are you? Ace's eyes were dull, looking at Li Ang with a calm tone. When he saw that the other party was not wearing a navy uniform, he expressed some doubts in his heart. But, it's just doubts. Now he is no longer qualified to express curiosity about other things. He's a prisoner about to be executed. Everything in the world has nothing to do with him. It doesn't matter who I am. I'm here to tell you something. That's enough, let you be prepared. I hope you can remember. With a smile on his face, Li Ang said slowly. What? Ace was unmoved and said lightly. He has no love for life, and the last thing he wants is to see someone come to save him. Chapter 288-Meet Ace. NLT, 49 and GT. He has no love for life, and the last thing he wants is to see someone come to save him. All of this was brought about by himself, and he didn't want to kill other people to pay for the sins he owed himself. Countless people had reminded him not to go to Blackbeard, but he didn't listen, and in the end, this was the result. Irony. Ironic indeed. With a hint of bitterness, Ace shook his head and sighed. Listen. Li Ang looked at Ace, and the other party also looked at him. Immediately, he opened his mouth with his lips and said, Luffy, I have entered the Advanced City and come to save you. Well. Ace's pupils shrank, and his face changed dramatically. This was the first time he showed such an expression in front of Li Ang. Luffy actually came to save him. That, the younger brother with a missing string in his head, actually came. Immediately, he felt a sense of nervousness and anxiety in his heart. Looking at Li Ang's eyes, his lips trembled, he didn't speak, he took a deep breath and calmed down. He understood that at this time, he could not speak in front of Li Ang. No matter how shocking it is, once it is said, it is troublesome. Okay, I'll take it with you and leave here. Li Ang waved his hand, looked at Ace's face change, and smiled. Tread. Tread. The sound of footsteps echoed in this empty corridor. Sir, please. Flying Squirrel looked respectful, and led Li Ang and Hancock to the direction of leaving the Advanced City again. Here, there was a silent scene. Inside the cell. Ace's eyes were a little misty, and he roared in his heart. Why, Luffy, you idiot, why did you come? It was my own fault, why do you still come? Bang. From the cell next door, there was a crisp sound. A Murloc with a blue complexion, of burly stature, wearing clogs, sat on a chair, and asked, Brother Ace, what is it that makes your mood change so much? My stupid brother, he came to save me. Ace's lips moved slightly, his face full of worry, said. Oh. Jinbei was a little surprised, his eyes flickered, he recalled the back of the man just now, always feeling a little familiar, and couldn't help but say, the man who came to send you a message just now is not easy. You see it too. Ace restrained his emotions and said solemnly. Facing Li Ang just now, compared to when he faced Whitebeard, he could feel the aura of suffocation. This momentum is even more terrifying than Whitebeard. He couldn't believe that in this world, there is actually a stronger man than the white-bearded father. Moreover, the age of this man is actually similar to him, almost the same. If you guess correctly, he is legendary, Li Ang. Jinping's face was heavy, and his tone became very low, said. Li Ang. Ace's face changed slightly, he recalled what the other party said before he fought with Tich. Among them, there were two kinds of people. This man, Li Ang, is a terrifying figure that even Tiki is terrified of. Why would such a person come to inform him? Everything has become very complicated, because of Li Ang's identity, they have to associate simple things with complicated places. Chapter 289-Lonely Red. Mission accomplished. Li Ang stretched out his hands and said with a smile, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, let's set sail for Marin Vando. I won't cause trouble, you can rest assured about that. Yes. The Flying Squirrel was a little nervous, and nodded quickly, saying. Insufficient strength, naturally, standing in front of Li Ang, he was inevitably nervous. After conveying the words to Ace, there was no need for Li Ang to stay in the Advanced City. Luffy has also sneaked into the Advanced City, and everything is going according to the original book. In this way, it is more interesting to focus on the war, isn't it? Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, thinking so in his heart. If staring at war is boring, what else is there to do with this war? At this time, Li Ang passed a cell at the end of the corridor. This cell is more gloomy and dark than other cells, and even the figure inside can't see. 183, but there is a vitality, showing that there is someone inside. When Li Ang stopped abruptly, he found that he had met an interesting character. Lord Li Ang, who are you? Flying Squirrel looked at Li Ang, who stopped in his steps, in astonishment, with a puzzled expression on his face. Who are the prisoners here? Li Ang turned his head, looked at the only cell beside him, and asked. It is independent here. In this case, it can also be shown from the side that the owner of this cell is not simple. Hearing this, Flying Squirrel carefully glanced at the number plate of the cell, his pupils shrank, and his face changed dramatically. It seems that he is really an incredible person. After seeing the Flying Squirrel's expression, Li Ang said with a smile. Lord Li Ang, this word, has been imprisoned here for at least 10 years. Back then, he was famous in the sea, and he was a terrifying figure who could be compared with the pirate King Roger, Whitebeard and others. Flying Squirrel still has some understanding of this, and answered quickly. Speaking of which, even he himself was a little dignified. This kind of terror exists, although it may be old, but its strength is definitely still very tyrannical. But fortunately, the other party was still trapped in the advancing city. Even if he had the ability to reach the sky, he could not easily break free from it and escape from here. Unless someone from outside comes to rescue them. But this is basically impossible. People from the outside world have to go through a lot of screening if they want to enter here. Only Li Ang is an exception. If I look at it like this, I should know who he is. Li Ang walked to the door of the cell, looked into the darkness ahead with his eyes, and said slowly. Bang! There was a crisp sound of iron chains knocking from the inside. A pair of aggressive eyes appeared in Li Ang's sight. Different from the prisoners Li Ang had seen, these eyes were still full of ambition, without any sense of confusion. Hee hee. A strange sound of laughter came from the cell, making people shudder, and the spine was wet with cold sweat. The Flying Squirrel was startled, and looked suspiciously at the scene inside. His right hand unconsciously held the blade, cold sweat dripped from his forehead, and his scalp was numb. This person is too big, and even he has to be treated with caution. Even if the other party is detained in a cell. In Li Ang's sight, the people inside walked out of the darkness. He has long white hair, tied into 2 curls and hanging down, his eyes are bright red, and the corners of his mouth have a demonic smile from time to time, and he is dressed in red as the main color. Although he was wearing a prisoner's uniform, what was hard to hide was the bright red color. What a powerful breath, it's really amazing. Chapter 289-Lonely Red. NLT, 51 and GT. What a powerful breath, it's really amazing. He walked to the door of the cell, his eyes fixed on Li Ang, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he said with emotion, "What a vigorous life, it is intoxicating." "Go back." Flying Squirrel shouted with a restrained expression and a sense of tension. He knew very well how terrifying the origin of such existence was. He can't escape. Li Ang stopped Flying Squirrel's words, looked at the evil man in front of him, the corner of his mouth curled into an arc, and said with a smile, "The legendary pirate, unexpectedly, met here, which is really unexpected. You still know me. It's not easy. With your age, you may not have been born when I was crossing the sea." The man's face was a little surprised, and he said with a smile. Even if he was trapped in a cell, it was difficult for him to hide his free-spirited and unscrupulous character. "I naturally know that according to legends, there are terrifying existences that can stand side by side with Roger and Whitebeard. Known as the Lonely Red, the Red Earl, etc., the terrifying Baroric Redfield." Quote. Li Ang quietly stared at the Baroric in front of him and introduced with a smile. Suddenly, Baroric in front of him was silent for a moment. He could not have imagined that Li Ang really saw his identity. "Lord Li Ang, you know." Flying Squirrel was stunned, completely unable to imagine that Li Ang would recognize the person in front of him. "That's right. This is the legendary great pirate, Baroric Redfield. He is a great pirate in the era of Roger and Whitebeard, and he does not need any subordinates. He is a huge force by himself. In this point, it is somewhat similar to Li Ang. They are all alone, and they are all monsters with boundless strength. To be able to fight against the Roger pirates and the Whitebeard pirates by himself, such a terrifying existence, his strength is naturally quite tyrannical. At least, his individual strength is definitely stronger than Whitebeard. From the station machine, you can also see the tyranny of Baroric. He is the only man who defeated the former admiral of the Navy, the current commander-in-chief of the world government's army, with a steel frame. This is something that even Whitebeard can't do, but Baroric has done it. He was alone and defeated the former Marshal Gang Ji Yukong. Such a record can be said to have caused a shock in the sea at that time. In terms of strength, he is more tyrannical than Whitebeard. Although he may be old now, he still retains his tyrannical strength. "Who are you?" Baroric was very uncomfortable, staring at Li Ang and questioning. It was as if all the secrets in his heart had been seen through by Li Ang. This feeling made him very uncomfortable, and he hated the feeling of being completely seen through. 4.2. "I'm just a new junior." The smile on Li Ang's face did not diminish, and he said lightly. "Junior, I see that although you are full of vitality, your strength makes me feel heartbroken. I'm afraid, you are not as simple as you seem." Baroric sneered, his expression calm, and said, "However, your age, I'm sure, will not exceed 30 years old. To be able to reach such a terrifying state in your 20s, your talent is terrifying. It's pretty decent." Li Ang waved his hand and smiled. It's been okay." The Flying Squirrel twitched at the corner of his mouth, and he was completely hit. Is such a terrifying strength just passable? Then his own strength, is it not even comparable to the garbage on the roadside? This is so heartbreaking. Chapter 290 give you a serious job. Li Ang's terrifying strength, I am afraid, has already surpassed the 4 emperors. But in the mouth of the other party, it is just passable. This made the flying squirt for a while, beaten to the core, and did not want to speak. He just wanted to go to the corner and be quiet and think about the distorted life. What's your name? Balearic found that he was a little interested in Liang in front of him, and asked with a smile. He has always disliked his companions, but he just doesn't like being dragged down by his companions. The Lin in front of him seemed to have the same feeling as him. Naturally, there is a feeling of sympathy. All alone strong. Liang. Liang smiled and didn't lie. Just a name, no need to hide it. Liang, I remember you. One day, I will find you. If you guess correctly, you should be the strongest in the contemporary era. I don't know how it compares to me. Balearic's expression was a little excited, and his fighting spirit was surging. That will have to wait until you go out. Liang said with a smile. He did not deny that Balearic could escape from here. And, this time will come soon. However, he didn't want to send the other party out to 12 in person. It's really slim in my lifetime. Balearic said with a hint of sadness. Even if he goes out, what can he do? His blood is dry, and he no longer has the strength level of the peak. Do you want me to help you predict your future? Liang narrowed his eyes slightly and said meaningfully, of course, it's not unconditional. If you agree, come and work with me when my language is realized. How about I give you a serious job? A serious job. Balearic laughed, but he was not in a hurry to refuse. In his opinion, there is basically no chance for him to leave here in his life. Unless someone comes to save him. However, he has always been used to being alone. How could someone take the risk and come to push the city to save him, which is basically impossible? There is another possibility. The advanced city completely collapsed, and the naval headquarters was overthrown. However, this possibility is even more insignificant. He won't count on a little hope. It is better to wash and sleep and maintain a stable state of mind. As the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Whether you want to hear about your future life, you choose. If you agree, then I will prophesy for you now. I can give you a hint, you still have a great chance. Liang's eyes flickered brightly and said. Aside. The flying squirrel looked a little nervous. Listening to this, could it be that Liang wants to release the other party? Thinking of this, the flying squirrel's lips trembled, a little panicked. Don't worry, I won't shoot. This is something that has been promised for a long time. How could I violate it? I will never default on my words. Liang saw the suspicion in the flying squirrel and said bluntly. Suddenly, the flying squirrel was slightly relieved, but his mood was tense again. The other party, how do you know what he is thinking? This kind of method, is too terrifying. Chapter-280 give you a serious job. This kind of method, is too terrifying. As soon as he thought of his inner thoughts, which might have been captured completely, the flying squirrel shuddered and his scalp tingled. I felt panic in my heart. Have you figured it out? Liang looked at Balearic and asked lightly. To be honest, he still admires Balearic. The strength of the individual is very strong, to the extreme, and it can also make him not have too much burden. It's okay to give the other person a serious job. However, a serious job in his mouth cannot be regarded as a serious job at all. In his cooperation with Doflamingo, there will definitely be some times when he needs to take action. At that time, letting Balearic take action can also save a lot of trouble. You mean, I still have hope? Balearic's expression became solemn, looking at Liang, said. Of course I never lie. Liang nodded, agreed, and answered. How do you know? Are you going to save me? However, if you want to save me, you can do it now. However, you will also face the arrest of the Navy headquarters. This is a very uncomfortable thing. Balearic pondered for a moment, and the fox questioned. I won't shoot, but I can give you hope. You think carefully, time waits for no one, and I won't wait too long for you. Li Ang waved his hand and said slowly. He doesn't shoot, but he knows someone will. Moreover, this person will soon start, and when the time comes, Barorik will walk out of the advanced city, like a fish in water, and obtain the ability of the phantom bat fruit. As long as there is enough blood, he can restore the peak strength of youth, which is quite terrifying. Okay, I promise. Barorik thought for a moment, raised his brows, and nodded. As long as he can leave this ghost place, he will agree to anything. Time waits for no one. This sentence just explains his own physical condition. His age is already very high. If he is still trapped in the advanced city, there is only one result waiting for him. That is, old death is here. This method of death was absolutely unbearable for him. As a famous pirate, dying of old age is a death method that no one can tolerate. Even if you die in battle, get killed, etc., you can't bear to die of old age. Barorik's mentality is exactly like this. It would be too wrong to be trapped in the advancing city. Then I'll give you a prediction about your own future. Listen carefully, only you can hear what I say next. 437. Quote. Li Ang showed a smile, and he used his lips to tell Barorik the next fate of the other party. In less than a month, you will be able to successfully escape from the advanced city. At that time, the advanced city will be in turmoil, and you will find a demon fruit called the bat fruit. Don't hesitate, eat it, you will gain tyrannical power. As long as you suck enough blood, you can return to the clear and peak period. This devil fruit is very important to you, you must not miss it. Wait, you can escape from here within a month. After you escape, Marin Fando, I'll be right there, waiting for you. After speaking, Li Ang reached out and entered the cell. Sir. The flying squirrel's expression changed, he was startled, and hurriedly said. At this moment, Barorik took a deep breath, and finally sorted out Li Ang's words. Although he was in disbelief, he still chose to believe the other party. For some reason, he always felt that what Li Ang said was true. Although it's bizarre, it's also weird. After all, as a human, how can we predict the future? This was something Barorik would never have believed in the past, but now, he inexplicably believed Li Ang's prophecy about him, and he couldn't explain why he had to trust Li Ang's words. Chapter 291 _ The prelude starts. Within a month, he will escape. Balorik's eyes flickered, looking deeply at Li Ang's face, remembering the other's face. The two look at each other. Li Ang was not at all timid, and Barorik also saw an extremely confident emotion in Li Ang's eyes. He trusted each other's words even more. This feeling is indescribable. Come on, shake hands and have a good time working together. The corners of Li Ang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. I hope what you say is true. Barorik stretched out his slightly pale arm and held it with Li Ang's right hand. Not hope, but, definitely. Li Ang said slowly with confidence on his face. This is not the picture that he sees by predicting the future, but he already knew that things would move like this, even if some small, 57, details were changed because of his appearance. But the big changes don't change anything. Whitebeard, Blackbeard, the Navy headquarters, etc., every force operates according to this certain trajectory. This is what he can be sure of where things will go. If he doesn't interfere, things will 100% move like this. Aside. Flying Squirrel looked at Li Ang and Barorik shaking hands, and felt a chill in his heart. A terrifying monster of an old age, and a terrifying monster of a new age. It seems that a cooperative relationship has been reached, which must be reported to the warring states marshal. It is hard to imagine how terrible turmoil will be brought to the world when these two powerful people cooperate. I'm afraid, one of the four emperors can be destroyed at any time. The flying squirrel's lips trembled, he thought. With the strength of two monsters, it seems that it is not so difficult to destroy a four emperors. Instead, it seemed very relaxed and stress-free. In other words, it is very possible that the cooperation between the two can directly shake the headquarters of the Navy. We must strengthen the guards here. Liang won't take action, but since he said so, someone will definitely do it. But who is this person? The flying skier frowned, thinking inwardly. However, even if he was fully prepared, he could not stop the turmoil in the advancing city this time. Unless, dispatch a great future to sit here. But it is obviously impossible for this situation to occur. The manpower of the Navy headquarters obviously has a huge shortcoming. You can only take one step at a time. The flying skier smiled bitterly, shook his head, and said. Moreover, this is just Liang's prediction, and he is not sure whether it is accurate. For the sake of a mere prophecy, it is simply unrealistic to send the future to guard here. Not only the warring states marshal would object, but others would certainly not agree. Thinking of this, the flying skier was helpless and had no choice. Go, after you go out, don't forget the conditions between you and me. Liang glanced at Barorik one last time, waved his hand, and said. I won't forget, I will never go back on what I promised. Barorik looked at Liang meaningfully, said with a heavy tone. That's the best. Liang waved his hand, pulled Hancock, and gradually stepped into the elevator. The flying squirrel also entered inside, and the three figures quickly disappeared into this infinite hell. Silence. It was in a silent environment again. Chapter 291 _ The prelude starts. It was in a silent environment again. Every cell is silent. In the dim environment, there is only loneliness, eternal loneliness. For many years. Balorik's eyes flickered, he looked at his old arm, sighed, and said. Being trapped here for many years, watching his vitality gradually lose, this is a very painful process for him. Finally, to leave. According to Liang's words, he can also get a devil fruit that restores youth. In the past, he was disdainful of devil fruit, thinking that this kind of power would bring him a huge flaw. In the past, his strength was also strong without relying on the power of the devil fruit. It's just that he is old now. This devil fruit, which can restore youth, is the devil fruit he desperately wants to get. If he didn't have this devil fruit, even if he really went out, his strength would no longer be the glory of the year, showing a decline, and even those so-called lieutenant generals would not be able to match. For the older generation of them, the biggest enemy is not others, but themselves. Their own vitality is gradually disappearing, and this is the biggest enemy they have to face. They did not lose to the enemy, but to time. Seeing Liang's back gradually disappearing, Balorik regained hope for the future. According to Liang, he can still regain his peak power. This is what he has dreamed of, and within this month, it will soon be realized. In other cells, the prisoners looked in Barorik's direction and talked in a low voice. This monster, how crazy is it, so excited. The man just now, after talking to him, he fell into a hyperactive mood. Could it be that someone is coming to save him? This is incredible. If that's the case, why don't you take me out too? Quote. The empty and silent infinite hell, after talking in a low voice, fell into a dead silence again. Advance the city, the first floor under the sea. Red Lotus Hell. A man in a navy uniform walked to a corner, knocked out the prisoners inside, and quickly took off the navy uniform and changed into a prisoner's clothes. The light shone through, revealing his young and immature face. He is the Straw Hat Monkey D. Luffy. Ace, I'm here to save you. Luffy gritted his teeth and said with a firm expression. Immediately, he kicked his feet and rushed towards the passage to the second floor at an extremely fast speed. Proceed outside the city. A ship is gradually sailing in the fog. A 1.0 board. One was dressed in black and had several teeth missing from his mouth. A burly middle-aged man with a rough appearance, thick hair on his body, and a grinning grin as he looked at the heavily guarded advanced city in front of him. He has dark skin, black hair, fluffy hair, and a headscarf. He wore 2 necklaces around his neck, bracelets on his wrists, and jewelry rings of different styles on his 10 fingers. There are 3 flintlock pistols on the left waist, and a bottle of strong rum is stuffed on the right waist. When he appears, he wears a white shirt and a black coat. Get used to not buttoning up and exposing your chest. Beside him, there were 4 people standing, a sniper, a sick young man riding a horse, a burly-looking man, and the last one dressed like a magician. This group, of course, is the Blackbeard Pirates. Chapter 292 _ Bucky the Clown. Ride the lift. Under the leadership of the Flying Squirrel, Li Eng took Hancock's little hand and returned to the position of the Red Lotus Hell. From the location of the Red Lotus Hell, you can go out to the gate of the Advanced City. There was a large group of people watching, and among them was Domino, who had wavy blonde hair. Marinfando, I haven't been there yet. Li Eng walked on the road, smiling with a touch of interest. Hearing this, the pressure in Flying Squirrel's heart became heavier and heavier, and there was some cold sweat on his spine. I really don't know if it's right or wrong to bring Li Eng to Marinfando. If a fight broke out, Malinfando was afraid that he would be sunk to the bottom of the sea all of a sudden. At that time, there is still a white beard. That is. Li Eng glanced at the prisoners around him, noticed an interesting figure, and couldn't help but stop. Lord Li Eng. Flying Squirrel stopped abruptly, looking at Li Eng with a puzzled face. At this time, Li Eng's gaze was fixed on one of the prisoners. This man was wearing a prisoner's uniform, his light blue hair was tied, and his entire face was painted in different colors, making him look like a clown. The red and round nose is very prominent. My lord, he's called Bucky the Clown, and he's an outlier among the prisoners. Flying Squirrel looked around, saw Bucky the Clown, and introduced. I know. Li Eng nodded, and after seeing the famous facial features, he had an answer in his heart. The other party was bragging to a group of pirates, and he was enjoying himself. He seemed very comfortable, and he didn't feel like he was in prison at all. It seems that wherever you go, you can live in a very happy state of mind. When Li Eng looked at Bucky the Clown, the other party seemed to be aware of it, and he also looked over. The prisoners in the crowd looked over. Bucky the Clown felt it was time to raise his eyebrows and shouted in Li Eng's direction, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen my Uncle Bucky?" Well. Li Eng's eyes flashed and he asked with a smile, "You said, whose uncle are you? Don't think that with the Lieutenant General here, you can be presumptuous. What this uncle said is you, what's the matter?" The clown Bucky raised his head and said very proudly, "Hey hey hey." A prisoner on the side couldn't help pulling the sleeve of Bucky the Clown, with a nervous expression on his face, said, "What's wrong?" Bucky turned around, looked at the prisoner beside him, and asked. It stands to reason that these people should not be cheering loudly and cheering for him, right? Not scientific. He usually made these actions before, which always attracted these prisoners to cheer and be excited for him, but now, he is yelling at another person in front of the Lieutenant General. This kind of behavior is rare, why are these guys not applauding? This made him feel a little depressed, and the mentality he wanted to show in front of everyone gradually disappeared without a trace, and he felt a little boring. You don't want to die." A prisoner's mouth moved slightly, his expression panicked, and he said in a low voice. "Why don't you die? He's not a navy, why should I be afraid of him? Although there is a lieutenant general standing beside him, so what?" Bucky was very confident and looked very proud. If you want to perform in front of everyone, you can easily win over many pirates to rely on yourself. Wherever he went, he seemed to possess the ability of a natural leader to make those people madly and blindly worship him. Chapter 292 _ Bucky the Clown. Wherever he went, he seemed to possess the ability of a natural leader to make those people madly and blindly worship him. But at this moment, the situation made him unable to control himself. Why is everyone so quiet all of a sudden? Not only was there no cheers, but everyone looked at him with such strange eyes. Am I doing something wrong? Bucky thought to himself, shook his head, and put aside the thoughts in his heart. You. A pirate was about to speak, but at this time, he saw Li Ang coming step by step not far away. His expression was frightened, he dared not speak, and his lips trembled. As for being so afraid, Bucky froze in his heart, feeling a little bad. He is not stupid, he is very clever, and when he sees the eyes of these people, he realizes that he may inadvertently provoke people who he thinks are terrible. I'm just pretending to be forced, it's over now. The clown Bucky was about to cry without tears, and he found that everyone's eyes were fixed behind him. Involuntarily, he turned his head and saw what he thought was the young man standing in front of him. This person was the one he had taken the initiative to provoke just now. At this time, Li Ang looked at the clown Bucky in front of him with a smile, and said, "Please repeat what you just said. I'll listen. It's been a long time since I've heard someone speak to me like this." I. The clown Bucky's mouth was trembling, and he didn't dare to speak. Don't be nervous. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, patted Bucky's shoulder, and said earnestly, "You're a talent, why are you nervous? I'll let you explain what you just said clearly." "I dare not, my lord, forgive me." Bucky immediately fell to the ground, knelt down, and panicked. Bullying the soft and fearing the hard, this is his character. He already felt that Li Ang was unusual, this person was completely different from the people he had met before. On the other side, he felt the terrifying feeling of facing prehistoric beasts. His breathing became a little messy, his shoulders were heavily suppressed by an inexplicable chi movement, and even his heart was locked by the inexplicable chi movement, and the frequency of his 567 beats changed. "Sir, you can't do it here." The flying skier hesitated for a while, but still reminded. "Don't worry, I have no intention of doing it. I just want to have a few words with him, is that okay?" Li Ang glanced at the flying squirrel and said lightly, "Don't dare." The flying skier stepped back half a step, lowered his head, and said in a panic, "See. Bucky's whole heart is cold, this is Lieutenant General." He stared blankly at the flying squirrel, and then at Li Ang. "What's the situation? Obviously this person is not the Navy. Why, even the Lieutenant General dare not be presumptuous in front of this person. What a terrible monster he has provoked. Forget it, I'm in a good mood today, so I'll let you go. If I bump into you at sea, maybe you'll already have a bunch of bones left." Li Ang looked down at Bucky condescendingly and said lightly, "Sir, spare your life." In order to survive, Bucky couldn't care less about his face, and hurriedly lay his head down and said in horror, "Let's go." Li Ang turned around, took Hancock's slender hand, and gradually left towards the gate. Flying Squirrel followed quietly, without speaking, but before leaving, looking at Bucky's eyes, as if looking at a dead man, very indifferent. Chapter 293 _ Bucky's Nightmare. This look made Bucky the Clown squeak in his heart, and his face became even paler. Seeing the flying squirrel and others leave, his lips trembled, and his expression was full of fear. He doesn't know why, he doesn't even know the identity of the other party, but what he can't hide is the fear in his heart, which overflows endlessly. "Bucky, you're done." A pirate came over and smiled with some schadenfreude. "Why?" Bucky's throat was dry, looking at the crowd, said, "Do you know who is the man who was talking to you just now?" The rest of the people opened their mouths one after another, with inexplicable voices. The way they looked at Bucky was weird. The atmosphere became a little intimidating. Bucky's whole person is not well, even a fool understands what a terrible thing he did just now. Even the Lieutenant General didn't dare to say a word in front of the other party. What kind of thing is his Bucky? If he wasn't in prison, he would be dead now. Who is he? Bucky swallowed his saliva, came back to his senses, and asked with the fear that could not be concealed in his eyes. Everyone sighed with emotion, and the words spread far and wide. I was fortunate enough to see him here before. He was also a prisoner here. However, he escaped in the end. Moreover, the Navy headquarters has also withdrawn the bounty on him. The second person who escaped from the advanced city was him. With his own strength, he was able to compete with the Navy headquarters, and even the Navy headquarters was overwhelmed. In the end, he had to compromise. In addition, the world government has not taken any measures against him. Everyone seems to have acquiesced in his existence, and no force dares to provoke him. Speaking of which, Bucky, you should know who he is. Everyone said a word, poking into Bucky's heart. After hearing these words, no matter how stupid Bucky was, he knew who the person just now was. It was because he understood that his face became paler and bloodless, his lips trembled, and he was unable to speak. Well, that person turned out to be Li Ang. Bucky slumped on the ground, his body was weak, and his face was unlovable, he said. You can see it, but it's a pity that you haven't come here yet, so it's normal that you haven't seen him diaresis. A pirate patted Bucky's shoulder with some emotion, and said with a happy face. Fortunately, the person who provokes that person is not him. He didn't want to be so short-lived to provoke such a terrifying big man. But the clown Bucky is different. This stunned young man slammed into the muzzle of the gun abruptly. Who can blame this? Not to mention being in prison, even in Marin Vando, in the Holy Land Mary Joa, who can sleep peacefully whoever provokes Liang. Tianlong people may not dare to provoke Liang. It's over, I'm done. Bucky's face was ashen, his eyes were lifeless, and he muttered to himself. His self-confidence, the self-confidence he wanted, all fell apart. In front of Liang, everything he is proud of will be useless. Brother, I sympathize with you. However, you are such a small person, presumably, that adults should not take it to heart. However, if you are unlucky, you will encounter him, and you will only have to die. Stay in jail, or you'll really be killed. It's your luck that the Lord didn't do it on the spot. Otherwise, you'd already be a corpse. Quote. Everyone was talking, all with a look of happiness. Fortunately, it wasn't them who provoked Liang. They also don't have Bucky's headless head, and they don't look at the object to cause trouble. This moment, Bucky understands how ridiculous his own behavior is. He shouldn't do anything to me. Bucky said quickly, his lips trembling. Chapter 293 Bucky's Nightmare. Bucky said quickly, his lips trembling. Who said that? It depends on the mood of the person. If you are in a good mood, you will be forgotten in a blink of an eye. But if you are in a bad mood, then you are finished. Who can escape from this man's hands? But then again, this lord was actually sent to the first floor of the Red Lotus Hell. The people from the Navy headquarters were really blind. No, but in the end, this one also escaped easily. Quote. Bucky was no longer in the mood to listen to the words of the crowd. All he was thinking about now was what Liang had just said to him. No, it won't. Bucky kept shaking his head, looking around with great vigilance, looking a little crazy. Seeing the change of Bucky, everyone shook their heads helplessly and sighed. They can understand Bucky's emotions, even if they know that they have accidentally provoked such a terrible character. They are afraid that they will be more neurotic than Bucky. This guy is going crazy. A pirate with orange hair shook his head and said bluntly. I don't want to stay here, I want to find a safe place. Yes, I want to find a safe place. If I get caught, I'm going to die, and I don't want to die. Bucky's eyes turned extremely fast, and in the eyes of everyone, he kicked his feet and quickly escaped from this area. Watching Bucky leave, many pirates shook their heads and sighed, with a bit of pity on their expressions. After escaping the crowd, Bucky came to a quiet snowfield. There was silence all around. Standing here alone, he felt even more frightened. Quote. He won't appear here, right? It's not safe here either. Bucky's pupils shrank, his feet moved, and he fled here again quickly. I don't know how long it took. Finally tired, he slumped on the ground, breathing constantly. It's safe at last. Bucky heaved a sigh of relief and looked at a stone statue in front of him. The whole person was like a lightning strike. This statue has a slight similarity with Liang, and ordinary people will never think of Liang's direction. But helplessly, Bucky has been completely dominated by the sense of fear brought by Liang. Now, when he saw this stone statue, the first thing that came to his mind was Liang. The more he looked like, which made him tremble, his eyes widened, and he fled here again. All the way. Bucky changed countless locations, but he rejected them all. No matter how safe a place is, it cannot give him a sense of security. Because the people he provokes are terrible. But he didn't know that Liang had forgotten him in the blink of an eye. It's just that Bucky is a very sensitive person, and his vigilance, Li Laojiao, is also very vigilant. With the mentality that he is not afraid of 10,000, he is afraid of just in case, and his whole head is in chaos. For fear that Liang would seek revenge on him, let him find countless places to cover. He didn't choose to live in every seemingly safe place, but kept looking for it, and the shadows in his head grew thicker. The fear in his heart is also infinitely magnifying. It's not safe here either. It's more unsafe here, another one. No, neither does this place. Quote. Bucky held his bloodshot eyes and was out of breath from exhaustion. He was constantly wandering in the advancing city, and the whole person was close to the brink of collapse. Vigilant by nature, in order to ensure that he is in an absolute safe range, he constantly looks for a place where he can feel safe. It's a pity that he can't feel absolutely safe anywhere. Therefore, every once in a while, he will change the location of his residence. Obviously, he was really frightened by Liang. Chapter 294 Marin Proceed outside the city. A warship gradually left the waters of the advancing city. On the deck, the flying squirrel watched Liang's back gradually leave. With a wry smile on his face, he shook his head and sighed. Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, the ship has been adjusted. A Navy soldier came and told the truth. Go. Flying Squirrel waved his hand and said slowly. He looked at the golden sea, and his heart was busy. This trip, I don't know if it's true. Taking Liang to Marin Fando is really a headache. What if a fight breaks out there? However, he does not have the ability to stop the other party, even if he refuses to bring the other party to Marine Vanduo, but with the opponent's terrifying strength, it is easy to enter Marine Vatican. Thinking of this, Flying Squirrel could not help but feel sad and bitter in his heart. You have to be careful, and try to let martial warring states remind those people not to provoke Liang easily. Otherwise, the trouble will be too great. Flying Squirrel shook his head helplessly, thinking so in his heart. The other side. In the room. Liang and Hancock returned to the small room. Now that the Flying Squirrel knew of his existence, he didn't have to hide it too much. How to do on weekdays, how to do 840. Anyway, basically everyone on the warship already knew about his relationship with Hancock, and it is understandable to be ambiguous occasionally. Just let many Navy soldiers sigh in their hearts. After all, seeing Hancock, the world's #1 beauty, fall into Liang's arms, they are still very disappointed. But for Liang, they are still quite sure. Besides Liang, who else has the world's most beautiful woman? Only a tyrannical monster like Liang is qualified to have such a beauty. My lord, you say, how many days are left to reach the destination? Hancock rubbed his black hair and asked with a smile. Her eyes were focused on the sea outside the window in front of her. Behind her, Liang held her slender waist with both hands, leaning back against Liang's chest. Feeling the warmth of the other party, as well as a strong sense of security, made her feel very happy. I don't know much about this. It's the first time I've gone there. What's more, this time, I'm afraid it's not just going to Marinfando. The place where you meet should be in Marijoa. Li Ang thought for a while, resting his chin on Hancock's fragrant shoulder, and replied. Marijoa. Hancock's beautiful eyes flashed brightly, but now she is not so afraid of the so-called Tianlong people. After Li Ang's release, she is quite confident in herself. Especially with Li Ang as a sturdy back, she has no reason to be afraid. What about even the dragon people? Provoking Li Ang, Tianlong people have to die. Don't think too much, I'm here. Li Ang's eyes narrowed slightly, and his arms gradually moved up. For a while, he hit the soft spot. With a swish, Hancock's pretty face was rosy, his delicate face was blushing, his eyes were blurred, and he lost his strength, leaning back against Li Ang, motionless. Li Ang rubbed Hancock's big white rabbit, and he couldn't hold a slap. One can imagine how devilish Hancock's figure is. It will be heard. Hancock's face was ruddy, struggling, stopping Li Ang's actions, and said in a low voice. Chapter 294-Marinfando. Hancock's face was ruddy, struggling, stopping Li Ang's actions, and said in a low voice. If you don't scream so loudly, won't you be alright? Li Ang drew an arc on his face and smiled. At the same time, his arrogance spread, preventing anyone from approaching this generation's area. Silly Hancock, who was really blushing, covered his face, gritted his silver teeth, was extremely shy, and held back his voice. When Li Ang saw Hancock's appearance, he couldn't hold back, and immediately rushed over. A few days later. A warship passed by on the sea, and the seawater on both sides was pushed aside and set off around. On the deck, the flying squirrel looked ahead, waved his hand, and instructed, "Speed down, get ready to disembark." Position directly in front. A huge sea fortress appeared in people's sight. The indestructible wall surrounds everything inside, the fortified buildings are folded heavily, and the towering buildings inside are made of special materials, which seem to be very smooth and extremely strong. Here is the Navy headquarters, Marinfando. On this trip, the flying squirrel needs to take Hancock to Marinfando, and after the consent and dispatch of the warring states marshal, then send the other party to Marijoa to reconcile with the rest of the Chihuahai. Each Chihuahai arrives at a different time, and naturally, it is impossible to arrive at the same time. The meeting of the Chihuahai can only be held after all the Chihuahai have assembled. Soon. The warship sailed smoothly into Marinfando, and after passing through many barriers, the naval soldiers dropped anchor and shouted loudly, "Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, you can disembark." I see. The flying skier nodded and looked at another location inadvertently. Crunch. In his sight, the figures of Li Ang and Hancock gradually appeared and walked out of the room step by step. Is hearing so sensitive? Flying Squirrel paused in his heart, he just wanted to remind the other party. But I didn't expect that the other party's perception was so terrifying. Arrived at Marinfando. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, pulling Hancock's soft little hand, and asked with a smile. Yes. The flying skier nodded and answered quickly. It's the first time I've come here. At the beginning, I almost came here to fight your navy. Fortunately, the warring states guy finally let go, otherwise, I'm afraid this place shouldn't be able to maintain such a good appearance. With a hint of emotion, Li Ang was not warning the flying squirrel, he was just talking about what happened back then. If it wasn't for the warring states period to let go during the battle in the G3 branch, he would have come to Marinfando long ago and destroyed this place directly. Yes. Flying Squirrel lowered his head, and said with a look of horror. He would never doubt whether Li Ang had this ability. Destroying Marinfando can really be done with Li Ang's power. This is what he was absolutely sure of after seeing the original sea and the scene of Li Ang being cut off with one sword. Even the sea has been cut off. Marinfando, what is this? You two, please disembark. Flying Squirrel took a deep breath, calmed down, and said, you can walk around here at will, I need to report to the Warring States Marshal. But please 2 people, don't step too deep, otherwise it may cause some unnecessary trouble. I know, you can just do your thing. With a smile, Li Ang took Hancock's little hand and jumped off the warship. Chapter 295 You brought the monster home, customize it. Seeing the departure of Li Ang and Hancock, the flying squirrel felt helpless and somewhat vigilant. He immediately instructed the men beside him. Remember, let those people not try to provoke the 2 of them. That is a killing god, a god of killing that no one looks down on. Lieutenant General, we understand. A dozen or so Navy soldiers nodded hurriedly, and followed the flying squirrel's order and walked off the warship. The rest of the people are their own busy. The flying squirrel walked in the designated direction, and the towering building represented the office position of the high rise of the Navy. The other side of Marin Fando by the sea, Hancock leaned on Li Ang's shoulder, his long smooth black hair fluttered in the wind, revealing that delicate and flawless face, which was incomparably beautiful. A breeze blew in, blowing her purple dignified slit robe. A pair of slender long legs like snow, walking around constantly, is intoxicating. She held Li Ang's arm in both hands, and while she was walking, the faint touch made her face flush, but she still held it and put it in front of her Uxiong. Li Ang's arm felt the softness and smiled. He wanted to ask, what did Hancock eat to grow up? To be able to grow such a devilish figure. Moreover, after his repeated moisturizing, Hancock's figure is obviously more attractive, and the white rabbit seems to be growing again. How many women are envious and jealous? Originally, he was already quite the devil's figure, but if he continued to grow, it would be unique in the world. Stop whoever comes. Ahead, a group of Navy looked at Li Ang and the 2 of them, frowning, and said solemnly. Looks like it's on the edge. Li Ang's face was calm, and he smiled lightly. He didn't have the idea of rushing in, but he just walked around here leisurely. Since he was stopped by the other party, naturally, he could just go back the same way. Let's go. Hancock smiled sweetly, and his delicate face was very charming. Immediately, the group of navies in front were stunned, their expressions sluggish. Few can escape Hancock's charm. Even women are no exception. Hancock's beauty can fascinate even women, let alone men. You little goblin. Li Ang rubbed Hancock's face and smiled. I didn't mean to. Hancock waved his hand innocently, his slender jade arm swayed in front of Li Ang, pouting his red lips, and said, they are so useless. It's just weird, you're so charming. Li Ang smiled, hugged Hancock's shoulder, and said. Does that captivate you? Hancock smiled and said. Of course, I can't resist your charm. Li Ang spread his hands, stopped, hugged Hancock's waist, looked at the blue sea ahead, leaned against the latter's ear, and said. Speaking at close range and blowing out a breath, Hancock's pretty face blushed again, his mood was a little strange, and his body strength gradually weakened. She quietly leaned against Li Ang's chest, her beautiful eyes staring straight ahead, motionless. The 2 seemed to form an eternal picture scroll, which is beautiful and intoxicating. ... In tall buildings. The marshal's office is also here. At this time. Inside the marshal's office. The flying squirrel faced the Warring States period in front of him and told everything about this line of work. Chapter 295 You brought the monster home. The flying squirrel faced the Warring States period in front of him and told everything about this line of work. Whether it was the appearance of Li Ang, or Li Ang's record in cutting off the sea at that time, or the destruction of the Starry Sky Pirates, etc. But whatever happened in this line, he told the Warring States truthfully. After learning that Li Ang's strength seemed to have improved again, the Warring States period was also silent. His expression was constantly changing, and his heart was heavy and depressed. This monster's strength has increased again. The corners of Warring States' mouth moved slightly, and his tone was low. The improvement of Li Ang's strength is not a good thing for him. Moreover, the relationship between Li Ang and Chihuahai Han Cook is unusual, and this is something that he needs to think about carefully. One of his slashes traversed an area of at least 2 kilometers. At that time, I couldn't see the end at a glance. I'm afraid, maybe 3 kilometers. The flying squirrel said with a solemn face and an uneasy mood. When he saw that picture, he was so shocked that he couldn't recover. Obviously, that is a power beyond the limits of human beings. Not to mention him, even in the Warring States period, for so many years, I have never heard of someone who can cut a gap of 3,000 meters across the sea with a single slash. This feat can definitely be included in the records of the Navy headquarters. There has never been such a terrifying person in this world. Today's Li Ang, even if it is the first, is the only one. Not to mention the establishment of the Navy headquarters, but since the existence of this world, I am afraid that people like Li Ang have never appeared. It can be said that there is no one before, and no one after. The Starry Sky Pirates, in front of him, were slaughtered directly like a chicken. In the end, even the bones could not be preserved, and they were turned into powder and sank into the bottom of the sea. Flying Squirrel's face became heavier and he said. At that time, when he saw the Starry Sky Pirates drifting at sea in sawdust, his mood was very complicated. Although the pirate was dead, he saw even more terrible things happen in front of him. This is a much bigger threat than pirates. Is he in Marin Vando now? Sengoku's face was heavy and he asked again. Yes, I had to take him to Marin Vando. Because, I don't have the power to stop him, it's better to avoid conflict. The flying skier pondered for a moment and said bluntly. You are doing the right thing, but your actions are still worrying. Sengoku's eyes flickered, looking at the position of the window, and said in a low voice, You brought a real monster to the door of the house and brought back Marin Vando. If a battle breaks out, the consequences will be unimaginable. This is helpless. The flying squirrel was helpless, waved his hand, lowered his head, and said, If you don't agree, a fight will break out in the end, which will be even more troublesome. It's okay now, he didn't have a conflict with us. Dong dong dong. The door was knocked. Come in. Sengoku said with a calm face. Crunch. After the gate was opened, a Navy soldier walked in and said slowly, Marshal of the Warring States period, Lieutenant General Garp has arrived at the coast, and General Iokiji, these two, by coincidence, returned to Marin Vando. I see. Sengoku nodded, not paying much attention. After that, his pupils shrank and he asked again, You said just now that the two of them just returned to Marin Vando. Yes, Marshal. The sailor answered truthfully. Immediately, Warring States became a little nervous, looked at the flying squirrel, and instructed, Avoid, they will collide, you have to take a look, just in case. Chapter 296 Why are you two so nervous? Yes, Marshal. Flying Squirrel naturally knew the urgency of the situation, and after nodding, he quickly left the Marshal's office. He didn't have time to follow the next step of Warring States, and immediately left the building in a hurry, and walked far to the coast. Inside the office, Warring States looked gloomy and uncertain, looked at the position of the window, took a deep breath, and said to himself, Hopefully, nothing like what I imagined will happen. Otherwise, there will be big trouble. Marshal of the Warring States period, there are other things that need your inspection. The Navy soldier took out some documents again, put them on the table of the Warring States period, and then said, 4 people from Shichibukai have come, and they live in Marin Vando. They are all waiting for your order to rush to Mary Joa. Who is coming? Warring States raised his brows, his face was calm, and he asked directly. Bartholomew, Hawkeye Mahawk, Moonlight Moria, Doflamingo. The Navy soldier reported truthfully, saying, the remaining female, 740 inches Daihen Cook and Blackbeard Tiki did not arrive. The Empress has just arrived, that is to say, there are 5 Chihuahai concentrated here. As for Blackbeard, where did this guy go? Warring States frowned, and felt very vigilant in his heart. Blackbeard, this ambitious guy, he has never been careless. In this emergency situation, the other party actually disappeared, which he had to care about. You know, Ace was sent by the other party, there is no reason to play missing at this time. But now he wants to find the trace of the other party, it is basically impossible. The war is imminent, and it is impossible for him to dispatch troops outside. My subordinates don't know. The Navy soldier lowered his head and shook his head. Okay, I understand, you go down first. I will arrange the next thing, and then inform you. For now, you should do the thing at hand first. Warring States rubbed his temples, waved his hands, and said, Yes, Marshal. After the Navy saluted, he also left the office. Here, Sengoku is left alone, with a sad face, thinking about many things. A Blackbeard has not arrived yet, so he cannot pay attention to it yet. But Blackbeard disappeared at this critical moment, and he must have a heart. The other party is very mysterious, and he has great ambitions. He must guard against all the unfavorable things the other party does about the Navy headquarters, and kill these things in advance. Blackbeard, what is this guy planning? Sengoku's face was dazed, and he couldn't figure out Blackbeard's strategy at all. The other party definitely has a conspiracy, he can be sure. But it was impossible for him to know what he was planning. Only when everything is revealed will he be able to understand Blackbeard's original plan. In addition to Whitebeard, the person he wants to guard against is Blackbeard. This guy is not easy either. Even his own father turned against the water when he said he was against the water. This kind of person is the most terrifying. Once there is a dispute over interests, I am afraid, it is time for the other party to tear up the face with the Navy headquarters. Before that, Sengoku must be mentally prepared and take measures to guard against each other. Besides, there is a monster just outside the house. Compared with Whitebeard and Blackbeard, his strength is even more terrifying. Of course, he should not be involved in this battle. Otherwise, with his strength, he can completely injure Malin Fando right now. For him, this is just a very easy thing. There are people with such terrifying strength in the sea, it is really powerless. The people above, I am afraid they have the same thoughts as me. They are all helpless, and I have no choice. Warring States shook his head and thought of Li Ang's picture again. Listening to the flying squirrel's words, Li Ang's strength became even more terrifying. It made him feel more and more heavy, although there is no dispute at present. But it is difficult to guarantee that there will be no disputes in the future. At that time, once Li Ang makes a move, the damage will be too great. With such a tyrannical figure in this world, as the Marshal of the Navy in the Warring States period, the pressure in his heart is not ordinary. Chapter 296 Why are you two so nervous? And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. With such a tyrannical figure in this world, as the Marshal of the Navy in the Warring States period, the pressure in his heart is not ordinary. There is much more to think about. Warring States frowned, and the hair on his head was white. These days, he needed to arrange too many things. Today, there are so many variables that even he can't control, which makes him very unhappy. There is always a feeling that things are about to get out of your control. This is the most annoying feeling for him as a naval marshal. Things were gradually getting out of control, and he didn't have so much confidence in his original plan. It's just one step at a time. Sengoku shook his head bitterly, thinking that this was the first time he felt so powerless. As a naval marshal, I can still feel so powerless, which is really the first time I have appeared. Marin Van Do, location on the coast. Both Li Ang and Hancock were walking on the shore, and the sea breeze blowing at them made them feel refreshed and looked at the sea in front of them, watching quietly. Looks like I saw two acquaintances. Li Ang was holding Hancock, and he was not afraid that this was the headquarters of the Navy. Many single dogs walked by, looking at Li Ang holding such a beautiful woman in his arms, all of them looked jealous. But after realizing Li Ang's identity, they had to sigh. Facing such a terrifying Liang, they only felt a deep sense of powerlessness in their hearts. Only such a tyrannical person can have the #1 beauty in the world. Numerous navies shook their heads and sighed, and left here in despair. Hancock leaned on Liang's chest and asked with a smile, "Who is it?" "You'll find out later." Liang felt the soft and cold touch in his arms, narrowed his eyes slightly, and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, I am really envied. Holding you, I always feel that I can draw a lot of hatred for me." Hem. Hancock raised his head arrogantly, and his long black and supple hair swung around Liang's neck. She said slowly, "Even people are yours. What's wrong with covering them up? Don't you want to?" "Yes, of course I do." With a smile, Liang unconsciously slid his hands on each other's body. In an instant, Hancock's pretty face blushed. He struggled, got rid of Liang's salty pig hands, and spat lightly, "Shameless, there are so many people." "Then what's the matter? The husband and wife are playing, what are they doing?" Liang smiled and said calmly. Suddenly, Hancock's pretty face turned even redder. He lowered his head and looked at his toes. Husband and wife. White smoke came out of Hancock's head, and he fell into a reverie. More she thought about it, the more excited she became, and she even imagined that she was wearing a white wedding dress in 4.6. See. Liang could only hold Hancock helplessly, his eyes staring at the sea in front of him. A warship gradually came to shore. From the deck, a strong old man and a young and thin middle-aged man walked down. These two were naturally Garp and Aokiji. Not good. Garp looked ahead and saw a familiar figure. His expression changed slightly, and he said in a low voice, "Let's take a detour." What a bad day. Aokiji looked solemn, looking at Liang's position, calmly, and Garp chose to take a detour, not to provoke this terrifying monster. But they were discovered by Liang long ago, how could they pass by so easily? Liang looked at the two positions with a smile, and said easily, "By the way, what are you two doing so nervous? I won't eat you, really." Chapter 297 Dog Green Pheasant. It's a coincidence, Liang, to meet here. Now that he was discovered, Garp had to go over and say hello, Lang said. However, his tone was also a little lackluster. After all, the person he faced was stronger than him, which made him, a person who had no opponents for most of his life, feel a little vigilant and cautious. Of the enemies he faces, who is the least he wants to face? In this world, the only enemy who can make Garp numb is Liang. It's not that they have never fought, it is precisely because they have fought that they understand the horror of the other party. The lineup at the time was already terrible. In addition to the two generals except Qingzi, plus him in the Warring States period, Liang was also unable to do anything, but in the end they were still defeated. Such a record makes Garp still unable to relax. But Liang's strength, even if he doesn't want to admit it, is still affirmed by him. Needless to say, Aokiji, at that time, he also saw the severely injured Kizaru, and under that kind of lineup, he was still severely injured. One can imagine how terrifying the strength of Liang in front of him. Mr. Liang, what a coincidence. Aokiji stood up with his head on his head, and said with a stiff smile. Now, they have also turned battles into jade brocade, and they have nothing to do with each other. Of course, due courtesy is inevitable. Even though they were very reluctant, there was nothing they could do. No matter what happened in the past, anyway, now they are not enemies. It's just that it can't be said to be an ally, it can only be said to be an acquaintance. If there is no opposition, there will be no disputes. Yeah, what a coincidence. I thought just now that the two of you were taking a detour after seeing me. Now, it seems that I misunderstood you. Liang narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile. Where is? Garp laughed dryly and said bluntly, "It's our honor to meet you here. It's quite difficult to meet you." "No, Mr. Liang, why are you here this time?" Aokiji's heart lifted, and his tone was slightly solemn as he asked. The other party came to Marin Fando, which is not good news. Me. Liang looked at the charming Hancock in his arms, and then at Qingzi, and replied, I'll accompany my wife, come here to relax. What, do you have any comments? Don't dare. Aokiji took a half step back and cupped his hands. However, he was also shocked by Liang's words. Look ahead. Liang hugged the female Emperor Hancock, and the expressions of the two showed that the relationship between the two was very close, just like a couple, inseparable. Seeing this picture, Aokiji's mood became more cautious. A Chihuahua, plus a monster, such a lineup is really unprepared. I almost forgot, Mr. Aokiji, you are still single. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stimulate you, I really didn't expect it. Liang looked at Qingzi in a blink of an eye, scratched his head and smiled. Ah! The green pheasant was stunned, with 10,000 grass and mud horses passing by in his heart, and his forehead was full of black lines. If it wasn't for him, he had to let Liang understand why the flowers were so red. Really, which pot is not opened and which pot is lifted? I'm a single dog, I'm proud, is it bothering you? Cough cough. Carp was on the side and almost couldn't help laughing. But he kept slandering in his heart, we are professionally trained people, how can we laugh? We will never laugh at our colleagues, no matter how funny things are, we will never laugh. Chapter 297 Single Dog Green Pheasant, NGT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. We will never laugh at our colleagues, no matter how funny things are, we will never laugh. Unless. Can't help it. At this moment, Garp almost couldn't help it, his face flushed, and he looked at the blue pheasant beside him, as if he had discovered a new continent, and then fixed his eyes on Liang. It was only then that he discovered that this Liang still has such a vicious side. In the past, it was really ignored. In one sentence, the face of the green pheasant turned black. This skill is simply the pinnacle. Qingzi, don't be impulsive. If you are angry, I will only tell you that you will be beaten. You also understand his strength. You have to learn to be patient, understand? Carp coughed dryly and quickly persuaded Aokiji. It's just that he didn't say it, but when he said it, the expression of wanting to laugh but not laughing made Qingzi's forehead burst into blue veins, gnashing his teeth. Good boy, how dare you stare at me? Garp was stunned for a moment, his face full of anger, and he looked at Aokiji. Lieutenant General Carp, I didn't. Aokiji was helpless and sighed. Can't be bothered, can't be bothered. There are people on both sides that he can't afford to offend. He can't afford to offend, can't he hide? Let's not cause trouble, let's hide, okay. Thinking of this, Qingzi waved his hand helplessly, his face full of grief, and said, Mr. Liang, you can watch it slowly, I have something to do, leave here first. I don't want to go slowly. I didn't say it. With your ability, General Qingzi, even if you look a little ugly, you won't be able to find a daughter-in-law. You say so. Apart from being ugly, you are also considered a young talent. Are you asking too much? The corners of Liang's mouth curled into an arc, and he said with a smile on his face. Poof. Garp kept shifting his vision, his face flushed, and he couldn't help it. Puff. Carp turned his head calmly, avoiding Aokiji's sight. After laughing, his expression returned to calm, but, no matter how you looked at it, you could see that he still wanted to laugh. That's right, everything else is fine, just ugly. 920. This sentence is directly like 1,000 arrows piercing the heart, and it will definitely blow up this kid Qingzi. This lazy boy has this day too. Carp murmured inwardly, looking at the blue-faced Qingzi beside him. He couldn't help but say earnestly, Qingzi, don't be impulsive and focus on the overall situation. Aokiji can only suppress all the anger. His face flushed. His flushing is completely different from Garp's flushing. He is aggrieved. Carp's, that's a smirk. Not far away. Flying Squirrel is long overdue, looking at the picture in front of him, his face is stunned. What's going on? It seems to be much better than he imagined. The three of them chatted happily. That's right. In his opinion, General Chingzi is also very happy. Didn't you see it? Lieutenant General Garp laughed until his old front teeth were about to fall out, and General Aokiji must be like this. Well, that's right. But, what makes them laugh so happily? Flying Squirrel walked step by step, looking at this cheerful atmosphere. He couldn't help but want to blend in. Immediately, he looked at it, and the identity of the people present was only the closest to him. He ignored Chingzi's darkened face and asked with a smile, General Chingzi, why are you so happy? Why don't you tell me? Chapter 298 _ The Flying Squirrel Who Wants to Cry But Has No Tears. Ah! Garp was stunned, staring blankly at the newly appeared flying squirrel, without saying a word. Then, he glanced at the green pheasant with a blue face, and for a while, he didn't know what to say. He can laugh at Chingzi, because his identity is higher than Chingzi. The former Chingzi was taught by him, and Chingzi naturally dare not have other opinions. And Li Ang dared to laugh at Chingzi, because the other party had this absolute strength as capital, and Chingzi did not dare to act rashly. But what about flying squirrels? Strength. Aokiji can completely abuse flying squirrels with one hand. Identity. The green pheasant is a general, and does not counsel flying squirrels at all. Under such circumstances, the flying squirrel actually dared to be stupid, and stretched out his head to ask why the green pheasant was so funny. He didn't know that Garp and Li Ang were just laughing at the green pheasant. Ha ha. Li Ang laughed loudly, patted the flying squirrel on the shoulder, and said in approval, You are very brave, and I admire a person with such courage. What's wrong? If the flying squirrel can't react at this time, then he is not worthy of being a vice admiral. To be a vice admiral, the head naturally cannot be a fool. Seeing Chingzi's increasingly gloomy face, the flying squirrel panicked and hurriedly said, Cough, General Chingzi, you continue to chat, I will go first. I am very sorry for disturbing your chat. Quote. Don't go so fast when you come. The green pheasant grabbed the flying squirrel's shoulder with one hand and said with a half smile. However, his livid face made the flying squirrel feel terrified, his whole body trembled. He quickly smiled and said in a low voice, General Chingzi, what's wrong? Nothing. I recently discovered that my strength may improve with my right hand. Just come and spar with me. I want to see how much my strength has improved. I think you should have no opinion. Aokiji smiled and said meaningfully. The flying squirrel didn't know where it was, but what the other party meant was to be open and above board and beat him up. It's just that he still doesn't understand why he didn't provoke the green pheasant, so he suddenly became angry. He didn't think he was wrong at all. Because when he came, everyone was obviously laughing and laughing. Why all of a sudden, Admiral Aokiji's face was so ugly? He didn't know that Garp and Li Ang were laughing and laughing, but Chingzi was really complaining that his face was gone, and he looked very embarrassed to stand here. At this time, he dared to come over and ask Chingzi what he was talking about, and what was he talking about. As it happens, there is still a rage in the belly of the green pheasant that has nowhere to shed. And the flying squirrel appeared. It can be said that it was destined by God. Lieutenant General Garp Diaresis. Flying Squirrel wanted to cry without tears, looked at Garp's location, and said, Don't look at me, I don't know anything. Garp hurriedly turned his head, waved his hand, and said, Clearly, you can see that Aokiji feels aggrieved in his heart and urgently needs to vent, but he will not obstruct it. He can only pray for the flying skier from the bottom of his heart. Very daring, not bad. Li Ang smiled, looked at the flying squirrel, and appreciated it. Flying Squirrel really had nothing to say. Looking at the expressions of Li Ang and Garp, he really didn't know how to provoke Chingzi. But right now, he has no other choice. The first level official crushes people to death. Chapter 298 _ The Flying Squirrel Who Wants to Cry Without Tears. The first level official crushes people to death. As a general, Aokiji completely suppressed his position as lieutenant general. He is not Garp. Although he is a lieutenant general, in fact, his identity is even more special than that of a general. Aokiji dare not take the identity of a general to Garp. But the flying squirrel is different. The green pheasant's identity is much higher than that of the flying squirrel, and it can order each other casually. Come on, don't try to run away. The green pheasant grabbed the flying squirrel's shoulder and said lightly. General Aokiji, I was wrong. Although he didn't know the situation, the flying squirrel couldn't hold back and shouted loudly. Anyway, it is right to admit the mistake. I don't know what was wrong, but seeing Qingzi's livid face, he admitted that he was cowardly. Anyway, it was good to admit his cowardice, and he could stop as much Aokiji's anger as he could. You're wrong. Where are you wrong? You're right. Qingzi laughed in anger and said bluntly, I'm just looking for you to practice, and I won't eat you. Why are you so afraid of me? Don't worry, I'll take it lightly. Come on. The flying squirrel wanted to cry, his throat was dry, he said. I can't tolerate your rejection, don't tell me, you look down on me so much. It's just a practice with me, how much time will it take you? If you refuse, you don't give me face. The green pheasant was expressionless and said coldly. Hearing this, flying squirrel didn't dare to refuse, so he could only grit his teeth, like an aggrieved little daughter-in-law, his face flushed, and he lowered his head, and said, okay then. You still have some guts. Aokiji glanced at the flying squirrel and said slowly. The flying squirrel murmured inwardly, but did not dare to say it on the surface. If he could, he would never want to agree, but there was no other way. Having said all that, Qingzi has already pushed him to the edge of the wind. If he refuses again, it will really be a face-to-face. Pheasant face. In this way, the future will be long, and he does not know what will happen in the future. Let's go, come and practice, I haven't fought physically and mentally for so long, my body is rusted. Just in time, I will fight with you to remove all the rust from my body, so as to meet the next abnormal battle. Aokiji twisted his arm and said slowly. Seriously. Flying squirrel's heart skipped a beat, his face turned pale, and he asked weakly, General Qingzi, don't take it seriously, I can't stand your attack. I know what I have in mind. I won't say more nonsense. Come with me quickly. Green Pheasant grabbed the flying squirrel and left, leaving far away, leaving Liang and Garp behind. The flying squirrel's expression of wanting to cry but no tears appeared in Garp's eyes, and it made him laugh wildly, and his tears were about to flow down. These two are really too funny. Recalling what the flying squirrel said just now, Garp couldn't stop laughing. Just now, the Big Zhao's family was complaining about the green pheasant. Seeing that the green pheasant's face was darkened, the flying squirrel was good. At this time, it suddenly appeared and gave the green pheasant a fatal blow. Mr. Liang, farewell. Garp looked at Liang in front of him, couldn't hide his smile, and said. No delivery. Liang waved his hand and nodded. Later, Garp also gradually left. Here, there are still Liang and Hancock left, returning to the quiet atmosphere once again. Lord Liang, you are really bad. Hancock looked at Liang with beautiful eyes, and couldn't help but chuckle while covering his red lips. I'm just telling the truth, how can it be bad? Liang put his arms around Hancock's slender waist and smiled meaningfully. It's really bad, you haven't seen it before. After he finished speaking, his hands rubbed randomly. Immediately, Hancock's pretty face blushed, and he glanced at Liang coquettishly and rolled his eyes. This amorous look was really intoxicating. Chapter 299 _ Field Battle. There are so many people here. Hancock twisted and swung his body, but this shy appearance aroused Liang's blood, and he couldn't help holding Hancock even harder with both hands. The palms moved around Hancock's body, feeling the soft position, and even more unscrupulously reaching in. The cold touch was intoxicating. Hancock leaned weakly in front of Li Ang, spitting like blue. His whole face was red and copper like the sunset in the sky. His delicate face was ruddy and bloody, with a strange charm. She was wearing a purple slit-style robe, revealing her white skin that made her yearn infinitely, with a pair of straight and slender long legs, with black high-heeled shoes under her feet, and a very tall figure. At best, Li Ang is half a head taller than Hancock. You know, he is already 2 meters tall at this time. But Hancock also has a proud figure of 1.9 meters. It can be seen that her straight and slender long legs are definitely more than 1.5 meters in length. Li Ang still has a little bit of leg control more or less. Don't really like Hancock's beautiful legs. A hand gradually spread to Hancock's thigh, rubbing the tender skin. The cold touch was very wonderful, and he was intoxicated. 18 After a major addiction, Li Ang pulled out his hand, put his arms around Hancock's weak body, and said with a smile, "What do we do? What do we have to do with them?" Yeah. Hancock's eyes were blurred at this time, and he couldn't find Bay. Li Ang rested his chin on Hancock's fragrant shoulder, sniffed the palm of his hand, and said with a smile, "There is still a scent left." "Bah, that's disgusting, you go away." Hancock blushed, and quickly pushed Li Ang away, saying, I like everything about you." Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, smiled, put his arms around Hancock again, and said softly. Suddenly, Hancock's heart softened, and the whole person squeezed into his arms violently. His pretty face was slightly red, his slender hands hugged him, and his head was thrown into the other's arms. Holding this charming Hancock in his arms, it would be impossible for him to say that he did not respond. But it is true that there are many people here, and it is impossible to start a war on the spot here. You have stirred my blood, but what should I do? The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, and he blew in Hancock's ear, saying, "Hem." Hancock raised his delicate face arrogantly, and said with a smile, "Who made you a rogue? It's all right, finally you can't bear it anymore." "Okay, your feelings are intentional." Li Ang's eyes flashed and he smiled. "I did it on purpose, what's wrong?" Hancock laughed, a sweet smile that seemed to warm people's hearts. "Then it's my fault." Li Ang laughed, his face full of bad intentions. "What do you want to do? There are so many people here." Hancock quickly blocked Li Ang and said with some fear, "Then find a place where no one is there. I'm domineering, I can observe movements within a few hundred meters at any time, and no one can get close. So don't worry, when we do that, no one will be there." "Found." Li Ang's smile became more meaningful and said, "No, no." Hancock shook his head violently, his face flushed, and said, "Doing that outside?" This was something she could never imagine. It's not that there is no one's problem, but that she can't stand it when she is exposed. "My clothes can also block the key positions of the two of us, just right." Li Ang laughed, hugged Hancock's body, moved his feet, and quickly disappeared in place. Hancock's face was rosy, struggling constantly, and said, "No, it can't be like this." "Who made you do it on purpose? You have to bear the consequences for what you do." Chapter 299_Field Battle. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. "Who made you do it on purpose? You have to bear the consequences for what you do." Li Ang said slowly with his smile unabated. Within the range of his domineering look, everyone will be found once they get close, and it can effectively prevent the picture from being peeked by others. It looks like it's really exciting. This is the legend, hit. Wild War. Hancock was afraid that he could not accept it, and kept struggling. Soon, Li Ang hugged Hancock and entered a small forest, where the trees were lush, blocking the sky and the sun, effectively blocking the light from the sky. There are also many jungles around. As a shelter, there is no need to worry about being discovered. It's just that what Hancock can't accept is that doing this kind of thing in an outdoor place is really hard for her to say and dare not imagine. She feels that her outlook on life has been expanded several times. Li Ang carried Hancock all the way into the depths of the forest, surrounded by countless trees and many jungles. The half-foot-high weeds blocked everyone's sight. Everyone's line of sight cannot exceed the range of 2 meters, and it will be blocked by weeds. In this environment, it is simply the most perfect environment. Li Ang slowly put down Hancock and suppressed a lot of weeds. The surrounding grass was lush. Even Li Ang couldn't see through the environment 2 meters away. Perfect place. Quote. Li Ang's eyes twinkled brightly and said, "No." Hancock blushed and blocked Li Ang with both hands, stubbornly said, "It's quiet here." Li Ang spread his knowledge and domineering, and he detected all the areas around a few hundred meters. There was no human existence, not even animals. Buzz. A terrifying tyrannical arrogance shook all the insects around to death. When he didn't want to do something, he was interrupted by these bugs in the middle. Sunlight shot down 217 and penetrated Hancock's pretty face, presenting her delicate and flawless face in Li Ang's eyes, rosy and hard to resist that charming charm. "No one's paying attention here. So, Hancock, no one will notice even if you scream out." Li Ang smiled like a big villain, walking his hands on Hancock's body. "Good husband, don't." Hancock suddenly softened, with a pitiful look on his pretty face, looking at Li Ang, said, "Now you know what's wrong. It's too late." Li Ang didn't accept this set, and smiled lightly. Beneath Hancock's struggling movements, a set of black clothes covers the two of them, and everything will not be able to see clearly. It's just that the bursts of sounds that came out were intriguing. Hancock actually held back and didn't let himself make a sound. But after a while, her expression became very strange. Overgrown with weeds. Silence. The environment of nature is nothing but silence. The lush grass is silent except for the subtle and strange sound. In this area of several hundred meters, there are lush jungles. No one knew that something intriguing happened here. Chapter 300 _ How can you be beaten like this, flying squirrel? Marin Fando, in the training hall. "Ah!" Flying Squirrel shouted loudly, and he didn't know how many bruises appeared on his whole body. He was directly frozen by the freezing so that his breath became icy cold. Flying Squirrel, this is just the beginning." The green pheasant looked calm, glanced at the flying squirrel, and said lightly, "General Qingzi, where did I provoke you? I was wronged." The flying squirrel gritted his teeth and said with a sullen face. He still didn't expect that that place offended the other party and was beaten to such a degree by the other party. If he didn't dodge quickly, he would have been injured more than that, and it would have been a deadly attack. Did he kill someone or what? Didn't you just say a word? Why, Admiral Aokiji is so angry. You didn't provoke me. Qingzi looked blankly at the flying squirrel. He definitely couldn't say what Li Ang said before, so what was he like? So, the poor flying squirrel, even if beaten, is still kept in the dark. He didn't even know what happened, so he let Qingzi vent his anger on Li Ang's behalf. "Come on, let me see if you've grown recently." The green pheasant was expressionless, exuding an icy aura from his body, and said slowly, "Good." The flying squirrel gritted its teeth, held a saber, and covered a layer of domineering armament. He had not fully recovered from the injuries he encountered with the Starry Sky Pirates. At this moment, he had to be forced to fight Aokiji again, which was really too hard. Thinking of this, Flying Squirrel felt grievances in his heart, and wished to vent his grievances. But the person in front of him is Qingzi. No matter how wronged he is, he has to endure it. "Don't let me down, your lieutenant general position, don't make me think it's not worthy of the name." Aokiji's face was calm, holding an ice thorn, and attacked quickly. Boom, boom, boom. The flying squirrel held a saber, covered with domineering weapons, and collided with the ice thorns of the green pheasant. In terms of speed, strength, reaction ability, etc., the green pheasant completely suppresses the flying squirrel. Naturally, with the passage of time, the injuries on the flying squirrel increased. Even 2 large bags appeared on his forehead, which seemed to be really funny. Boom! A loud bang. The flying squirrel was instantly knocked into the air, fell to the ground and rubbed several meters away. Looking at his current appearance, where can one think of the position of a lieutenant general? At first glance, he looks like a beggar. Vice Admiral of the Navy headquarters, where does he look so embarrassed? Cough, cough. With a trace of blood on the corner of the flying squirrel's mouth, he looked helplessly at the green pheasant in front of him. In terms of strength, he really can't beat the opponent, and the opponent can really suppress him with one hand. In terms of official position, he is only a lieutenant general, and Chingzi is a general. Anywhere that can be compared, he is not as good as Aokiji. This time he was beaten, and he could only admit it. Come again. Before the green pheasant had vented the anger in his heart, Lang Lang shouted. Come back. Flying Squirrel smiled bitterly in his heart, but he had to stand up and fight again. The two soon fought again and again, and the scene was so hot. But it is obvious that the flying squirrel is unilaterally abused, and the green pheasant's clothes are complete, so it can be seen that the flying squirrel did not touch the corner of the green pheasant's clothes at all. The strength of the two is too surprising, and they are not at the same level at all. About an hour later. Chapter 300 _ How can you be beaten like this, Flying Squirrel? And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. About an hour later. Comfortable. Aokiji exhaled heavily, with a smile on his face, and said slowly. Immediately, he looked at the flying squirrel beside him, and couldn't help saying, Lieutenant General Flying Squirrel, remember to go to the infirmary. If you leave a dark wound, it will be bad, and I will feel guilty. After speaking, he left the training hall step by step. The remaining flying squirrels were half kneeling on the ground, holding a saber, and they were all red and swollen, and no part of their body was left intact. This damn green pheasant is really good at it. Flying Squirrel gritted his teeth and couldn't help cursing. Hiss. After touching the wound, he gasped, it was so painful. Carrying the injured body, he left the training hall with difficulty step by step. You have to find a place for treatment quickly, otherwise, it will be troublesome. The flying squirrel gritted his teeth, thinking to himself. On the surface, his injuries almost looked like someone who was seriously injured. But in fact, Aokiji still knows how to keep his hands. It is impossible to directly destroy a lieutenant general. It is just a simple injury to the skin. Therefore, the flying squirrel is very miserable on the surface, but the real injury is only the skin on the surface, and does not leave any hidden dangers in the body. In this regard, Aokiji is still very measured. Where did I provoke you? Damn Aokiji. Flying Squirrel thought angrily in his heart, looking at the distant medical room, he was suddenly helpless. He still had to walk thousands of miles to reach the infirmary. This painful body can't bear him walking for so long. Every step he took was a torment for him. The trauma to the skin was still quite painful. The stinging pain made him take a breath of cool air while walking, and gradually left the training hall. Hiss. The flying squirrel took a deep breath and scolded, this green pheasant really dares to attack. When my strength becomes stronger, I will let you taste it. However, when he thought of the terrifying strength of Chingzi, he lost his confidence. Forget it. The flying squirrel helplessly shook his head and sighed, but he should deal with the wound first. As for revenge, Aokiji can only think about it. The strength of the opponent is not at the same level as him. Want revenge, unless he is too long. In case the revenge is unsuccessful, and the other party is hanged and beaten again, it will be too embarrassing. It is also said that this possibility is also the greatest. 2 hours later. Above tall buildings. In front of the marshal's office. Dong dong dong. To Jiao Hao. There was a knock on the door. Warring States, who was sitting on a chair, spoke slowly and said lightly, "Come in." Crunch. After the door was opened, a person wrapped in white medical cloth walked in, like a mummy, with no skin exposed except for a pair of eyes. "You, who are you?" The Warring States were shocked, the corners of his mouth moved slightly, and he asked. "Marshal of the Warring States period, it's me, the Flying Squirrel." The Flying Squirrel was aggrieved, and looking at the expression on the aliens in the Warring States period, he knew how shocking his appearance was at the moment. "This way I came from the infirmary, but I was laughed at all the way." Fortunately, most people don't know his identity, otherwise this is simply the most terrifying black history in his life. Flying Squirrel. Warring States was stunned, stood up from the chair, surrounded the flying squirrels and took a good look, then lost his voice. "Why are you beaten like this? Who beat you? This is really cruel."